Welcome back to another edition of NMRAx. I'm Speed, hanging out here at the bottom of the helix. Today we have a clinician and a breakout room afterwards. And in the what do you call them? Marketing slides. There was a link to it. I believe it's www.wearby.com/OMRG. We will also try to put that in the text messages. So let's get going. Our first presenter is a modern era modeler whose layout features the Union Pacific in the San Francisco Bay Area around the late 1990s. He's the owner of Model Ray Control Systems, which offers communications, signaling, and layout control products, including the MP series switch machines, all supporting operations. He's a past president of the Layout Design SIG, a former director and vice president of the Operations SIG, as well as the coordinator of the CMRI SIG, and currently the NMRA SIG program coordinator. Please welcome Seth Neumann.
Well, thank you, Speed. So a number of you, I think, have heard me talk over the years about telephone systems for operations and about Arduino-based circuits for uh, controlling CMRI layout control bus equipment. Uh, Today, we're going to talk about uh, much simpler circuits that allow you to enhance operations and animation on layouts that are typically doing timetable and train order or track warrant control. There's a whole lot of functionality that railroads used in towers, sometimes called interlocking plants, uh, and a lot of other things that go on layouts, such as grade crossing controllers, staging yards, things like that, that can be easily addressed with simple Arduino circuits. Uh, you can do this a number of ways, but my preference has been to use small Arduinos on circuit boards that package all of the components needed to solve a particular problem. And this means much less wiring underneath the layout and much easier troubleshooting if you need to swap out a unit. And to do that, I've been designing small circuit boards that combine these various functions. Um, these are really pretty easy to use if you've got any familiarity with either vector graphic or CAD programs. They have a bad reputation for steep learning curves, but these particular products are fairly easy as they go. Um, uh, Autodesk bought a company called Eagle, which many of us use, and KiCad's also very popular. Um, what I like about it is once you've designed the board, which is fairly quick, turnaround from a variety of suppliers is quick and prices are quite low from several onshore sources, and there are some offshore sources, and there are some domestic sources as well. For me, it takes about as long to lay out a circuit board as it does to wire a prototype. But once the design is done, I can get more boards in anywhere from 4 to 7 days at $1 or $2 each. So that's very economical and very quick, and probably takes me less time end to end than trying to build up a breadboard. Once you've got it, of course, PC boards, are are kind of unified. It's easy to solder everything together. You don't have a little cloud of wires surrounding them, always breaking off, getting snagged on things, or attracting the cat's attention or whatever. It's just much simpler to install and troubleshoot. And of course, once you've done it, the minimum order is 5. So you probably keep one to look at the board and you build the first one, and you might need a second, and you can give the others to friends. The designs are easy to share, so you very often find that somebody else has built something like it, and you can either use their design or modify it, or you can, lend your design to someone else. And, there's a couple of caveats at the bottom, but this is generally true for model railroad use. Um, what's an Arduino, right? I've kind of come in here saying everybody knows about Arduinos. But looking at the Arduino website, arduino.cc, it's an open source electronics platform based on easy to use hardware. The original project was led by an Italian electronics professor named Massimo Bonzi, and his target audience was artists who wanted to animate their work. So, little motors to move things and light to light things. Well, if you back up 10,000 feet, that really is a pretty good working definition of us. Um, and So he went about building an ecosystem that made it easy for people like that, people like us, to build things. So Arduino boards are simple. They can read inputs. In our case, maybe a train crossing an optical sensor, or you pushing a button on the fascia, and can turn it into an output or combine a bunch of inputs with rules. And the result is a switch motor or servo moves or a LED lights. And you can tell your board what to do by, he says, sending a set of instructions, programming the chip. And he created an integrated development environment, which is to say an editor and compiler, something that takes the rules and packages them up and ships them off to your chip. Um, so this is really neat, but at the end of the day, building another microcomputer board wasn't terribly exciting. People had been doing that for years at that point, and certainly have continued to do it for all sorts of purposes. What I thought really the brilliance of the thing was getting a bunch of Italian artists to program in C++ without telling them that. And the good news is, if these guys can learn, you can too. And these programs are simple, but they do the job. You're not going to go out and get a job as a software engineer having done a few of these, but it's going to be good work for you and your friends on their layouts. So, based on all that, I've developed some simple circuit boards to do some things we need to do. We need to control train order boards if we're going to be handing out orders on a timetable and train order layout. Similar circuit would be good for a very simple automatic block signaling system with semaphores. Um, we might want approach indicators to notify that train order operators when a train is approaching, or on the bell. Ding. We have a Morse code sounder controller for our telephone systems, so that instead of every station buzzing the same, each station rings or buzzes with its telegraph call sign in railroad Morse. And it only plays one at a time, so there's no confusion as to which one is ringing or being called. All kinds of interesting interlocking plant and yard entrance controllers. So I'm going to focus on a couple of what I would call high runner applications, but really your imagination is the only limit. So think about a problem you have to solve that would be nice to have a little intelligence under the layout, but not have to worry about a computer being on during your op session or open house, and away we go. Um, there's some other things that I'll talk about just because we can do them. Servo switch machine controllers, stall motor and MP motor switch machine controllers. These are great for yard ladders and staging controls, as I say. Grade crossing controllers. When I first learned about Arduino from John Plocker, he was telling me, well, it will run a servo and you can flash lights and you can operate external sound generators. And I'm thinking, this is a grade crossing controller. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Also, stepper motor controllers for all kinds of animation and a lot of other useful tasks. So when it comes down to it, for these boards, I mostly use Arduino Nanos and Pro Minis. These are very small, kind of, large postage stamp kind of size, and they're cheap. Quite bluntly, from offshore marketplaces, they typically cost $3 each. They have slightly different programming arrangements. Generally, this is driven by the collaborator I'm working with and what their comfortable with. But the Nano, for example, uses a standard USB cable, so a lot of people like that. The Nano and Pro Mini use the same Atmega 328P processor as the Arduino Uno, which is probably the most common of all the Arduinos. And it's important because you can buy very inexpensive, on the order of $20 or $30 development kits that include the processor, a collection of sensors and actuators, output devices, and a little breadboard so you can do some experimentation. And what that means is that you can do your development on that kind of environment and then very, very easily move, or the software word is port, the application to your Nano or Pro Mini. This allows you to leverage the entire Arduino ecosystems, stepper motor controllers, Arduino relays, and so forth. And this stuff is all used by the STEM kids who are doing robotics and so forth. In fact, if you're in education or you have a kid or a grandkid who's into robotics, I know a lot of people in the hobby do, you'll find rating their parts boxes very rewarding. But seriously, this stuff is widely available, easy to use, and definitely, if you have a connection to the STEM education community, leverage it. The types of boards we're building are generally referred to as breakouts, which means we take the core device, the Arduino, and a few of the key things that are needed for that circuit, and we break out the connections to terminals and so forth, so it's easy to interconnect them. And the idea is minimizing wiring under the layout, making it much easier to install and maintain the systems. And they look nice and clean. So a question I'm often asked is, well, why not use shield type Arduinos? These are the Unos that use the kind of 2-inch by 3-inch form factor. The Mega is another one like that. And these are nice processors that do all sorts of useful things. But for our purposes, they're a little weak because they stack vertically and they're only held together on these thin pins on the bottom of them. So they tend to come loose or lean over. In fact, John Plocker, the fellow who I was talking about earlier, used to build these stacks of Arduino devices with several shields, and all the cables stuck on the upper shields would weigh so much that they would pull the thing over. We referred to this as the leaning tower of Plocker. And the problem with that is it makes it very difficult to install them upside down on a layout or on the support sideways, which, if you look under most layouts with electronics, that's what they're doing. So I find that while those are handy for development, they're not terribly practical for a production application. Another thing is that a lot of what we do is lighting, and we're using LEDs, and the LEDs require limiting resistors. Almost none of these shields provide for that. They do have other ways of controlling LEDs, but they tend to be a little fancier than what we generally need. So again, I prefer the small dedicated board that has pretty much just what's needed. So all that said, here's a few applications. Dual semaphore servo controller, right? So you want to control a train order board or a 2-arm semaphore. If you look here, and I'm hoping you can see my cursor, on the right side of the photo, there are a couple of servo motors, SG90s, with the horns, right? And your actuator wire hooks into one of the holes on the horns, and it's designed to be mounted vertically under the layout, and it'll hook right onto your train order board or your 2-arm semaphore. Or you can turn the horns around so that the horns are sticking out, and it's about track width plus a little bit. So if you've got 2 semaphores facing at a block boundary for an automatic block signaling system, it's right there. And then, of course, if that mechanical arrangement doesn't work for you, the RC community has all manner of servo linkages, or you can simply remove the servos from the board. You can see the servo cables kind of peeking out from below. They normally go onto these connectors here and are mounted to the back, but there's nothing to stop you from remoting them. I wouldn't go more than a foot or two, but and you can put your servo motors wherever you want. And it doesn't have to be a semaphore. It certainly could be used for a 3-position stub switch, for example. So got a few, specs over on the right, but you can look at this. It's on my website under Nano Breakout Boards. This was a John Schmidt contribution, and all the software as well as the CAD designer up on the website. John wrote this up in April's Rail Model Craftsman, and it's an excellent article, which actually is a good part of our documentation. And let's see. Another project I worked with John on is kind of a fun one. This was for Paul Weiss's Central Vermont layout, the Central Vermont in California, since he's in Nevada, maybe 20 miles north of the Golden Gate Bridge. And the problem that John was trying to solve was Paul's got 2 operators who sit in very nicely equipped offices kind of underneath the layout, but they can't really see each of the 3 or 4 stations that those operators serve. And what we wanted to do was to be able to have the operators alerted when a train was approaching. And what John did is use the analog to digital converter feature of the Nano, and it's off the board in this photo, so you get a little bit better view of what's on the board. And what he's got is a pair of sensors in each direction for each station, so that you can determine direction. So, it only dings if it's coming towards you. And if a train is leaving the station, you don't get bothered by a superfluous ding. I believe in the prototype that actually happened a lot. But what'll happen is when a train is approaching, it'll fire one of the relays, and the relays can be used to operate a bell or a buzzer. We actually worked with our friends at Iowa Scale to have their soundbite with a version that uses a recording we made of a Union switch and signal bell, which was the typical thing the railroad used. So you get that nice ding when a station is approaching. Anyway, it's really nice. You don't generally need external detector circuits. You just put the sensor there, and all the debouncing and light level adjustment is done on the Nano. If you want more than 2 circuits, you can add 2 more with dedicated sensors. Another version of this was, the same board is used by the La Mesa Club for their train order operators, but they had a club rule against sticking optical sensors between the rail, so they did something a little bit different, and Barry Draper contributed a sketch for that application. So you can handle this a number of ways. And let's see. Okay, this is all pretty much we've talked through. Here's another one a little bit older using the Pro Mini type board. You can see it has a slightly different connector. I'm wiggling the cursor, but if you can't see that, there are 6 little gold pins coming out. This is called an FTDI interface. It's just a different way of programming it. The FTDI cable is easy to use. It's USB at one end, and you just plug it in on that end. And otherwise it's fairly similar to the Nano. This board is designed for that application where there's a lot of noise going on in the layout room, and we'd like to only ring one phone at a time, and it taps out your code in railroad Morse. So rather than having buzz buzz buzz, you have something more like da 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 da, or whatever your code is for that station. These handle 7 stations each, and you can gang as many of them as you want. So I actually include most of these with most of the phone systems I do for people. Okay, more details. Here's a little bit more of a platform product. There's a device called an Arduino relay, which I'll get to in a minute, but these are very inexpensive modules that allow you to use logic level 5 volt out. That's why they're called Arduino relays, because typically they're driven by Arduinos. And they provide as many as 16 single pole double throw relays. And they have ribbon cables, which makes wiring them together a snap. And they have several different patterns, but they all basically are ground, bunch of outputs, and power. And so what we've done is just provided various combinations of outputs so you can optimize the use of outputs on your Nano, and then it will control these relays. Now, the first application I did this for was a client who had a bunch of sound modules on his layout, and he wanted them to play randomly. We needed to be able to say what was the minimum length a particular effect was going to run, the maximum length, the probability, and what the maximum number of sound effects would happen at a time. Because you can imagine it would just be incredibly annoying if the dogs were barking, the birds were chirping, the river was running, the fire in the hole was going on at the mine, and the sawmill was taking a deep cut. So, normally you'd set it to no more than 2 or 3 at once. Anyway, all this randomness is handled by parameters on John's sketch, and then it just drives the relays as needed. But other applications are, many, many, many. Interlocking plants, yard throats, staging yard controllers with power cutoffs, so you don't have locomotives getting up and wandering away, and you don't have to listen to all the sound when the operator forgot to turn the sound off. Almost anything you could do in the classic world with diode matrix, but you have the ability to add timing, and you can check for all sorts of outside events, check for track occupancy, all the this but not that kind of logic that's difficult to do in a matrix. And, of course, another way of stating that is intelligent control panels. And, these wiring patterns are used by a variety of devices, so there's no particular magic to using an Arduino relay. They can be used for all sorts of sensors and other things. And, if you have an application and it has a slightly different cable and you like what we're doing, get in touch. We can probably do something for you. Here's an example of an interlocking plant. You can see the signal down on the left, lower left, the left photo. And on the right is the operator's office for, I think Laurel and East Ricca. And this is SP Crossing. And you can see we've got a model board. We've got a couple of train order board controls. And way over on the right, we actually have a vintage Union switch and signal controller that's used to set the switch and signal direction. And this was done with an earlier version of the same product. So Arduino relays in summary, 1, 2, 4, 8, and 16 channels. We'll talk a little bit more about some options. We built a dual pole, a double pole, double throw version. We built a stall motor control version, and they all plug in the same as the 8-position Arduino relay. So your code, doesn't need to change, doesn't need to be aware of which is which. You just pick the appropriate interface. We also have an I/O expander, which will expand beyond the base 16 outputs of the Nano, or inputs and outputs up to 144. So that's another option. So here's some examples if you're having a little trouble visualizing, but you can see these are Arduino relays. If you can follow the cursor, there's a 1, a 2, a 4, an 8, a 16, and here's our little board, and you just use flat ribbon cables to go from say the 16 over, or the 8 position to go over here. Here's some 4s and so on and so forth. And this just can all be done with plugging pre-built connectorized cables. So minimum of wiring on your back under the layout or down on your knees, very easy to deal with. And did I mention they're really inexpensive? So those are great for generic Arduino relays, but no sooner had we done that than Well, first of all, John Schmidt, the guy who wrote the code, came back and said, well, gee, I really need double pole, double throw relays. So I built John this board, which is essentially an 8-position Arduino relay, but it has double pole, double throw relays. So there's more contacts. And you can, mix and match these with the contacts on your switch machines. So you've got, lots of controls. You can even do a little relay diode logic with the outputs, mix metaphors any way you like. Of course, as soon as we got to controlling switch motors, stall motors are very popular, Tortoise and Hankscraft in particular. So what I did here is built a 5-volt input circuit to make this compatible with an Arduino relay, and used the same wiring pattern as an 8-position Arduino relay, and took Dr. Chubb's SMC12, which is the kind of the standard Tortoise driver in the CMRI world, made an 8-position version of it, and it'll plug right in, and you don't have to worry about the 12 volts feeding the op amps blowing up your 5-volt Arduino voltage. It's handled somewhat differently in the CMRI system, the classic Chubb's CMRI system. So it works fine if you're in that world, but trying to mix and match, you can damage the Arduino if you don't take precautions. So this is a buffered version that's kind of bulletproof for you. And okay, big long list of what the connections are and so forth. You can look it up on the website or just get in touch. Another opportunity or application is a grade crossing controller. And there's lots of great grade crossing controllers out there. A lot of my, I don't even think of them as competitors, collaborators, colleagues who have similar small electronics businesses make these things. They're very good. But sometimes you want to do your own for a variety of reasons. Usually you've got a grade crossing at the end of a interlocking plant or a yard throat, and you need to integrate them. And there's a couple of good sketches out there. Jeff Bunz's is pretty well known. And John wrote one, and basically John's does all the normal grade crossing stuff. But again, the sensors are read directly by the Arduino, so you don't have to have a complete detector, which might cost you $15 or $20. You just take the photo transistor, which is on the order of 50 cents to $1, and you read that directly from the Arduino, since we've got all the hardware here. And you can mix and match and extend this to as many tracks as you want. It can communicate with your yard throat, all kinds of good stuff. Let's see here. Okay, so we do a couple of other things, and some of them use a smaller, really basic Arduino, which is very small. It's an 8-pin dual inline package, and it's very inexpensive, usually well under $2. And it's got plenty of power to do a lot of things we want to do. Here's a switch motor controller my late business partner, Chuck Catania, developed, and it's a locking controller. So what happens is, if you've got a CTC system, there are cases in which the dispatcher would like to release a switch at, say, at one end of a siding, so that a local can work that without having to constantly call every time they need the switch moved. But it can also be arranged so that if the computer isn't present and it's not, asserting its "I'm here" line, the controller releases, and now you can walk around your layout and operate the switches without having a dispatcher. So this is great for reset night or work night, when you just want to move a few trains around and you don't need a dispatcher, and you don't want to, go to all the trouble of firing the computer up. I know, first world problem, but handy thing to have. The one on the right is a product that's still under development, but I just think it's very cool. This is a servo controller for one servo, and we had such a product before, but it relied on what's called a PIC, programmable intelligent controller. And the PIC in question became unobtainium during the pandemic. And there were some other issues where it didn't really fit with our production process terribly well. So we built one with an AT Tiny, which is a little Arduino. And what's cool about it is that it goes and senses when the servo is facing resistance and turns itself off automatically. So it's self-calibrating, and you don't with servos, particularly the inexpensive SG90s, they tend to wear over time and the resistance changes a little bit, and periodically you need to recalibrate them. So this one kind of gets around that. Anyway, a very sharp guy named Lawrence Kroll has been working on that, and I expect to have it later this year. And let's see, a little more details on those products. Okay, one more that we've been working on. This is haven't quite finalized it, but we certainly do have some boards if you want to play. This is a stepper motor controller, and stepper motors are great for continuous motion. Think ball signal, maybe for like if you're a Sandy River fan or Maine Central fan. Anything with a crane or an elevator, anything like that that's going to move continuously. Our friend Dave Zune up in St. Paul has been using these to build an alternative to the old New York Railway Supply turntable controller. So they're very handy. And you can buy little boards that have this driver chip and the connector and a couple of LEDs and this inexpensive servo. But what we felt was much easier to do was to put the whole stepper motor control circuit and the Arduino and connections for limit switches. You usually want to bring it back to a home location, and you may want to have a don't go any further than this limit switch. And it's got an on-off switch and a couple of test buttons. And we did originally a single motor version, and then this one's a double. So that's nice for example, a crane where it may rotate and then also lift. And it's a handy little board for a lot of cool animation projects. So here's a couple of examples that Earl had done. In Graves Elevator, if you look over on the right, again, I'm hoping you can see my cursor. The elevator moves up and down outside the building. You can see the stepper underneath. This used a somewhat older board. The supplier, unfortunately, has discontinued it. So that was one of the reasons we built this board. He also built this wonderful ore unloading thing, which was kind of a earlier version of the Hewlett loader you probably know about. And you can see he's got 6 of these cranes. He's also got a little powerhouse here. But if you look over on the right, you can see there's a motor underneath each one of the cranes, and underneath it is a Rev 1 board underneath. And these things are all just operating away, lifting and going up and down, and the powerhouse has got a smoke generator and it's puffing smoke out. I wouldn't have that thing in my layout room, though. You just never get rid of all the soot from the smoke generator, but looks very cool, and it'd be great in an exhibit hall. One other one he did is this crane. There's an animation here, but speed tells me they don't play well, so we're not going to go there. But what you can see over on the right is the line is on a load of lumber, and it picks the load up, swings the crane around to the flatbed truck, and drops it down. And I think he was going to move the guy standing on the flatbed truck because we were going to have an industrial accident there pretty quick. But anyway, just wonderful, crowd pleaser for an open house. And let's see. So those are some great examples. Now, you're probably, you may be thinking, this is really cool, but I'm not sure I want to take on the whole project. So what if I haven't made a board for your application? Number one, look around. Somebody else may have one or something similar. Secondly, ask. I might have something similar in mind. Most of the modifications are just different connectors, slightly different version of the Arduino for one reason or another. Like I have a pile of them on my workbench. You need a slightly different combination of stuff on the board. Um, these are easy to do. And if I haven't made one like that and it looks like an interesting project, I'll do your design. Just ask. It may take me a month or two to get it into my queue, but we do these things all the time. And let's see, a couple of resources. We're winding down here, speed. Uh, uh, the robotics community has a couple of great suppliers: Adafruit, SparkFun, Seed Studios. Um, and again, if you're hooked into the STEM education community, they may have a few others. Pololu maybe for some of the robotics stuff. You can get your parts at any of the marketplaces, Amazon, uh, AliExpress. It's a little bit of a crapshoot, but the stuff is very inexpensive. And it used to be the quality was, you buy 20% more than you need because you're going to have that much fallout. I have to say, in the last 6 months, I don't think I've had anything bad. So it's really getting a lot better. And, typically it'll be in your hands in 2 weeks, and the shipping's minimal. Traditional distributors, Jameco and all, both cater to hobbyist, education, very small run manufacturers. Um, and they're great for us. I mean, obviously, like anybody else, stock comes and goes. Traditional distributors, DigiKey, Newark, Mauser. Um, you have to worry a little bit about minimum order and shipping, but generally pretty good. They had all of us on allocation during the pandemic, but much, much less as time goes on. You can always come to me. I stock a lot of this stuff and we'll sell it. Again, if you see a part I use and it's not listed and you think you'd like to purchase it from me, ask. Usually I can do it. Some things I really, buy in batches for specific production runs, but I try to standardize, so I've usually got a little inventory buffer. Other resources, Arduino.cc, again, very good guys. They build the infrastructure that much of this rides on. If you've got a few extra bucks, it's nice to make a contribution to them once in a while. Model Railroad Control Systems. Almost all the product pages have pointers to the designs and the software or both. There's a very neat software tool called GitHub, which is used by all sorts of people from professional users to hobbyists, where you can easily share code and designs. And I would point you to just a couple to start with. Mine, John Schmidt, who wrote some of the code for some of these devices. John Plocker, who's really been my mentor over the years. I think Speed has something up. So there's a bunch of us, and most of this is available. You can use it. It's almost always licensed under the Creative Commons. The only thing we would ask is if you get something that you're not embarrassed by, contribute it back to the community so other people can build on your experience. We've got a list called Arduini, as in more than one Arduino. Maybe a little play on Tech Weenies on groups.io. Feel free to join. I don't moderate much, just keep spam out. Good CAD programs for circuit boards. We talked about Eagle and KiCad. PC board fabricators. I personally like JLC PCB and Seed, but many people I know have had very good luck with PCBWay. There are others out there. I can't speak for them, but not that there's anything wrong with them. I just don't know them. And Oshpark, as I say, is the guy in Utah. His boards are this weird purple, which I just find that a little obnoxious, but the parts are perfectly good. There's nothing wrong with them. So anyway, lots of, there's a good ecosystem around this. And for more information, contact me. Okay, Speed, at this point, I'm available for questions.
Sure. So first one is, how much do I need to know about electronics to play with Arduinos?
Well, not a heck of a lot is the good news. We have a lot of software people who, really had no idea about hardware who do very well with it because the interfaces are really standardized and a lot of it's plug and play. And really that's been the focus of this whole effort is to make it plug and play. Um, if you can wire up a control panel with LEDs, this is well within your comfort range.
So if I look around on your website and I find some product that I like, then I order it from you and you ship it to me. And now how much do I need to know about code?
Just about nothing. Some of them need a little configuration, but it's not a question of I'm modifying the logic of the program. If you go to the source and download it, there will usually be a little note saying, "Oh, if you want to change the number of outputs or the direction of the outputs, just change this line." So it's never any worse than filling in a table.
So that brings us to the next question. People are asking how much of the code is available if they would like to change it or improve on it.
Almost all of it. Again, I listed some of the GitHubs, and uh, there are pointers on each product page to the code. Very often, you'll end up in somebody's GitHub repository, but you don't even need to download GitHub. You can just download that particular program or code and see what's there. And you can always get in touch with me, or I will set you up with the person who wrote it if it's not me.
So is there some documentation that comes with it?
Well, there's a pointer to the documentation. I
Okay.
try not to ship paper around just because you end up paying the post office to ship paper. So probably better that you download it and print the things you want on your printer. Um,
So
cheap for you, good for the planet.
yes. So when I do need to modify code, I assume you need to install all some software and maybe a USB driver and have a cable to program it. Is there
Right,
some
right.
guidance to those somewhere?
Yeah, yeah. And most of it's actually the Arduino IDE, and they have excellent tutorials. Again, if you run into a problem, uh, you know, get in touch. Honestly, the only thing you ever really saw, you'll download the Arduino IDE. Almost all these devices now use a serial driver chip, the infamous CH340, and I see Speed smirking because he's been there. Uh, in the past, CH340 drivers were often not supplied and caused a great deal of grief. The good news is you are much more likely to get, with a new computer to have them already, and the process for doing it is fairly simple, and we've documented in several places. So what you're usually down to is a USB cable, uh, the Arduino IDE, and installing the CH340 driver if you even need it. And I won't completely minimize it. It is an issue that sometimes crops up. We've done some live Arduino clinics, and I remember one where we had, I think, one helper for every two people in the class, and all we did was run around and install CH340 drivers. And Jeff Bunza, who had organized that clinic, was swearing never again, never again. But it's gotten way better since then.
Most of us actually make sure that you get some of that stuff installed before you show up because it's
Yeah,
horrible to
yes.
give a clinic in 45 minutes and we spend 43 minutes installing stuff. So
Oh, I'm sure at some point we need to have a wonderful little panel discussion on horror shows during Arduino clinics.
it will be a double show. So here's a real question. What voltage does Arduino use?
Typically, they'll run on 9 to 12 volts. They do have an onboard regulator. The internal Arduino itself is 5 volts. Usually, there is a regulator, but the regulators are not big, so you want to minimize the amount of voltage you need to regulate down. Um, but if you look at the spec sheet, it'll probably tell you between a 6 and 9 volt transformer, and that will depend somewhat on the part you're using.
So here's a good question. Is Arduino Does Arduino have computing knowledge or more like a smart receiver that performs repetitive acts?
Oh boy, that's almost like AI, right? What's the definition of intelligence? Um, it's a little computer, and it just doesn't have a lot of what's called code space. You can't write a great big program in them. And so generally, for what we're doing as hobbyists, it's more like a smart receiver. You could write a real program on it, and for example, some of the things you've done with IoT are in a gray area where you clearly need more than a 328, the chip that
Correct.
most of these devices use. But it's not a real computer, quote unquote. But there's some legitimate code space, and if you wanted, you could have a program, doing real work. Generally for our purposes, again, looking at your Internet of Things kind of applications, um, we end up throwing most of the processing power at just managing the interface. And it just makes it easier for us as the developers to work. But, you know, it's kind of what you're trying to do.
Okay, so while we're in that space, someone asked, does MRCS sell anything with MQTT?
I
And
haven't yet, although actually, off the record, Speed and I have been talking about adapting some of that to some of our boards. So, I personally think it's really the future of where we're going because the just the breadth of things you can do with it and the ease of connectivity are, generations ahead of anything else we're doing.
okay, back to the basics. Where is the best place for someone with no experience with Arduino to learn more about how they work and what else they can do?
I would
Just
just go to
basic
the
stuff.
Oh, well, start with the Arduino.cc site and work the tutorials.
Hmm.
Uh, most of your basic classes are going to be that plus the, what did Jeff call them? The 10 Arduino elves running around getting you plugged in. Um, but, it's very, very simple programming. Now, I think many of us here, certainly Speed and I are kind of looking at this from the other end of 40 years of having done it, and we're kind of fuzzy on what it was like when we started. Um,
I always smile when I remember when I had to build a plus minus 12 volt RS-232 transceiver to get information out of a microcontroller that ran with a EEPROM that I had to flash with a UV light, so clear with a UV light, and in order to get what, like 300 baud into the computer to tell me that the chip is on.
oh, the 2708 and 2716. I
Yeah.
remember them well.
And
Yeah,
and and now
exactly.
now today's kids buy a $1.50 nano and they stick it in, and on the computer it
Yeah.
says hello world.
And all that stuff is a little board the size of a postage stamp that costs $2, and
Yeah.
it's single-ended. You don't have to worry about the negative supply. It's all the annoying things have gone away, which is what makes this so great for model railroaders. You can really jump right into doing the stuff that's fun and that does some work. And so much of the infrastructure that and I know many of our audience, I'm sure, what we grew up with, you just don't need to deal with that anymore.
Correct. Correct. Okay, so a more personal question. Since I have a suspicion you have a fairly large layout somewhere there around you close by, How much of that is controlled by Arduino?
Oh, everything. My CMRI system is run by Arduino. Let's see, the tall buildings with aircraft warning lights, uh, the building with internal lighting where we cycle the various rooms around. Um, let's see, the the industrial gate that opens up uh, and pulls a little pin to prevent locomotive from ramming the gate. Um, Golly, what else? Uh, Train order board animation. We're
Cool.
working on a cute one for an old depot that the freight house is now a restaurant. And so we have one of these linear actuators, kind of a little jack screw that moves the waiter back and forth, and you can look in the window and see him with his platter full of dishes. And when it hits the limit switch, we've got a recording module. Haven't done this quite yet with the dishes crashing every few times. Um, so
So
all
do you
kinds
know
of
what
fun.
we really advance? If you have something that generates smell.
Well, you could, but then we'd have to vent it out of here. And, for big model railroaders, I'm not sure we need to bring any more of that in. We did think about the restaurant turns out to be a sushi joint. We did think about some
Oh,
dead tuna, but, we have cats in the house, and I really didn't, need to lure them into the railroad room.
cool.
Yeah, but you imagine a logging layout. I mean, all the drag lines and all this, or mining layout you could have, and high wires and all the wonderful things that could be automated with this.
We just installed a fairly large stepper motor underneath Jerry Hoverson's layout here in Melissa, in Texas, getting ready for the big convention that has an up and down switch for the steam donkey to bring the cars
Exactly.
down and then pull them back up. And the only last part is to turn the sound module on, so you do get the steam donkey's noise when it
Well, there
starts
you
up
go.
and
Exactly. And
when
you
it
could
ends.
put all that, yeah, you could put all
Yeah,
that together with
yeah.
the sorts of things that we did. And obviously you guys just went and did it because there's lots of ways to achieve this. But yeah, that's exactly what we're going for with this collection of boards.
But there's a note that safety is still important, because at some point while I was underneath the layout, I decided, what happens if this stepper motor decides to do its own thing? So I decided to grab the spinning disc. I, I could not stop the motor, which means that if that the idler car gets to the top, and the stepper keeps pulling, it's either gonna come through that tiny little straw or something's gonna break.
Well, they are torquey little boogers, if
Yes.
that's your point. And yeah, you can, obviously you got to do your mechanical design like anything else in
Yeah.
model railroading, and be sure it's not going to damage itself, or worse yet, damage you while you're working on it. We can always replace the motor. Model railroaders are harder to find.
Yeah. And if people come to the convention, they can meet you.
Absolutely, and they can obviously see your great work in Melissa, because that sounds like a wonderful application.
Cool. Let me quickly check if there's any questions in the Facebook feed. Nothing there. Well, Seth, I think that's the end of the questions. Oh, someone asked, what is a steam donkey? Not steam donkey, steam donkey.
Go for it, Speed.
Well, I don't know. It's a miniature horse that runs with steam.
Pretty much. I mean, that's how it got the name, isn't it? It's just a little
I guess
hoist
so.
engine. Yeah,
Yeah, little thing that makes gears move, and it's run by making fire.
right. And, little stepper motor is a great way to simulate it. So, uh, you know, there you have an application for these things in, again, logging and mining layouts, which, are, not normally things you'd associate with interlocking plants and train orders.
Cool. Well, thank you very, very much. I have a note. We do not know if the breakout rooms are set up. Let me just
Oh,
quickly check. So unfortunately, the time zone in Australia allow for that to happen. So I guess they will have to come to the convention to meet you.
I guess so. Well, we'll be there. Certainly have a little table for the CMRI SIG, and I'll certainly be hanging around your program on
Yes,
IoT and Arduino. So I look forward to seeing you all there.
cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
What's happening?
Hello and welcome back. Our next clinician grew up in Colorado. She began liking steam trains in the 90s, and she'd drag her mom and brother to watch UP steam as far away as Wyoming. She's going to compare for us tonight chasing the Union Pacific Big Boy with rail fanning the Cumbres and Toltec. Please welcome from Cheyenne, Wyoming, Jennifer Howell.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Howell. I'm here to talk to you about the difference between rail fanning Big Boy and the Cumbres and Toltec. Both railroads have gorgeous steam engines that the public can enjoy, and they both provide lots of opportunities to take photos and videos, but each one has a whole different type of experience for the rail fan. So when either one, you need to make sure you're prepared. When you're chasing Big Boy, it can go up to 45, 50 miles per hour. So you got to be ready and just ready to go. So that means you got to know your routes. You have to have all your equipment, anything you need for the day. There's not a lot of time to make pit stops to grab food and use the restrooms, so on and so forth. So it's good to have as much as you can with you. And sometimes weird things happen. So it's good to have some extra stuff. Like I definitely like to have the first aid kits and some tape and scissors just to help if equipment is needing a little quick fix for a temporary thing, like you need to tape your cell phone up to a post so you can have a cool angle for a video. Helps to have some tape with you. And it's just fun to have a different way to have a different angle for your videos while you're taking photos. So if you do both at the same time like me, it's just always good to have a lot of good equipment to be ready to have good angles and a different perspective. Big Boy is pretty much during daylight hours, and a lot of times they'll leave at like 8 in the morning, 9 o'clock in the morning-ish, but they are out there prepping the engine around, I think around sunrise, maybe a smidgen later. It probably depends on where they're at. So it's good to know where the engine is at, where it's going to take off from. It's good to know what roads will be traveling around the railroad to give you easy access. So make sure you're familiar with that beforehand. Use Google Maps or whatever mapping service you happen to like. All of that is good to have, and to make sure you're just familiar with it so you're not sitting there pulled over on the side of the road looking at your map for half an hour and miss a bunch of really cool opportunities to go do some photos. Those of us that have chased it before know that there can be quite a long line of people pacing. So it's good to know if you can get around that little bit of a traffic jam and all the local people trying to drive on the roads as well. So it's just also a safety thing. If you're in a rush, you don't want to cause any kind of wreck or anything. So just be safe about how you get around traffic. And if you are pacing, be careful. Make sure you're not going to hit anybody in front of you or in a lane next to you, that kind of thing. So when I was chasing Big Boy back in 2019, it was on its way back from going to Chicago. They were on quite a lengthy excursion, so I got to chase it through eastern Colorado a bit before a great big storm hit on the night of Monday, November 29th, 2019. So this shot here I took in Watkins. It's an area I knew really well. So I was able to find my spot easily, have all my gear set up. I had my coat on, I had something to sit on for the wait. Sometimes you're waiting a while, sometimes you're not. So it's good to just have something comfy to sit on while waiting and just be ready to take your shot. So as Big Boy approached, I had two different cameras going with different focal lengths of lenses, so I could get it kind of further away and closer. This shot was not the easiest because there's a ton of people down the road at a crossing waiting for it to come through. Crossings are extremely popular for people because you get the whistles in your videos. So as you see a little to the left of the engine, you can see a cop car right there. But to the right off the picture was a ton of people just sitting there enjoying Big Boy, waiting to go across. So I just made sure I did a good job using both my cameras. I had a cell phone on a tripod taking video as well. I had that going at a little bit of a different angle for a different perspective. So this photo is in Deer Trail. This one I saw earlier that morning, and it was pretty far down the track. We could hear it coming for probably several miles by the time we got here. And it was nice and cool out since it was November, so we had some beautiful plumes of smoke. I wish I remember off the top of my head how long my lens was when I took this. So my lens goes up to 600 millimeters, but I don't think I was at full zoom. As it approached, it was going pretty fast. It was the first time I'd ever seen it go like 45 miles an hour. And I was definitely not crazy close to the tracks. My cell phone camera was on a tripod close to the tracks and I was further back. But as it approached, I went to change to my other camera, the shorter lens. And I was just so impressed and awestruck that I actually didn't realize I dropped the camera on ground because I was just in such awe as it passed, like thundering past me, feeling the vibration and smelling the smell of it and just the heat coming off the boiler, even like 30 feet back or so, was pretty impressive. It was quite a sight. So if you have not seen it go past you yet at a high speed, be ready. Don't be too close. Everyone, for some reason, likes to get crazy close to the tracks. But if you're too close, you're not going to get a really good shot of the entire engine. You'll get like a really close shot of like the running gear, part of the boiler, but not the whole engine. So it's definitely good to be a little further back, plus you're out of the way. And where that location was not a real crowded spot. Here I took this picture. It's a little pixelated, sorry about that, with my old cell phone, and I was going through my car window because I was stuck in traffic on an exit going over I-70 in the town of Strasburg, Colorado. It is not quite close to town yet, but was on its way there after my Deer Trail stop. I thought about stopping here, but I saw how the traffic was, how crazy it was, and I decided not to stop. And I was probably in a traffic jam, just trying to get off the non-ramp into on a real road for at least 10 minutes and possibly longer. It's been a while. Can't quite remember that far. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting a little too old. Hard to say. So just be ready for crazy stuff like this. But when you're on property, as you can see, people are in the middle of the tracks, right on the ballast. Don't be that close. Remember, the engine hangs quite a ways off of over the railroad ties and off the tie. So you don't want to be anywhere in the ballast. Further back you are, the better. Like Ed Dickens says, 25 feet back at least. You can get a great photo even at 50 feet back and great video even 50 feet back. But like I said previously, people like to go crazy close for whatever reason. So here was earlier that weekend. This is a stop they did in Lyman, Colorado that Saturday, November 23rd, 2019. And they stayed there for that evening and all day the next day on Sunday. They left Monday morning, the 29th. Was it the 29th? I can't remember now. No, because it was a Monday, it'd be later. So anyway, as you can see, there's a lot of people. It is hard to get a full-on engine shot with that many people. So I was kind of a little far back where normally you could get a pretty cool shot and decent angles, but a ton of people in the crowd. What's hard to see in this picture is right in front of the engine, there are people taking turns, taking pictures in front of the engine. So some people in the crowd were helping people by taking their picture for them if they didn't have a friend or family member with them, which I thought was really cool. A lot of rail fans are pretty nice like that. They're willing to help each other out. Like, hey, I'll take your picture for you. So you could get a good shot, not some kind of goofy, awkward looking selfie with only a little part of the engine. Here, I was able to kind of crop out a little bit of the crowds. This was near the Archer area in Cheyenne. they were heading eastbound into Nebraska. This was the trip that they eventually went down to New Orleans. And you could see there's people's heads kind of down by the sunflowers. But they're kind of blurry, so I did end up leaving them in on some of my photos. I cropped a little bit of the bottom out to take some more of the person out, but I still wanted part of the cow catcher, so I didn't completely crop all of it out. So everyone is a little different on how they choose and want their photos to look. And crowds, it's hard to manage, so you just have to kind of be like, well, if it really bothers you having people in your picture, crop the heck out of it. If it doesn't bother you a ton, but you're okay with it, go ahead and leave them in, because it's so hard to truly get crowds out. It's always good to have some nice close-ups of different parts of the engine, because you never know if you're modeling it or someone you know wants to model it, like what parts someone might need to see a close-up of, to see like, okay, what does this look at like? How is this shaded and painted? And it's just kind of nice to have some different perspectives. Here we're kind of getting into some golden hour light. So this is back in Lyman. I stayed there pretty much all day until almost the whole entire crowds were gone. So as you can see, there's nobody on the other side of the train. There, at this time, they had a bunch of us move to this side of the train and behind a barrier as they were finishing up their maintenance. And it paid off waiting, because just look at that light, is so beautiful. And not a 50,000 person like group around it. So here you can see Kurt Clark doing some maintenance on the gear. And it was just fun to sit and watch, see what do they do at the end of the night to get it ready to go. I don't think I put a picture in, but they do all kinds of weird little things before they close it up and leave for the night. Some guys stay on the train in the dormitory car, and the rest go to hotels, so it's never truly alone. But it's just really fun to learn and see what goes on there. And just a great way to also sometimes ask questions when it's a smaller crowd. Some of the guys are able to talk to you more once the maintenance is almost over. So a lot of people in different Facebook groups are constantly asking, how do I know where Big Boy is? Where is it going this year? Is it going out again? How do I find out? Here are some fabulous ways to know what is going on. If you don't follow and you want to, go for it. Follow these or help other people know about them. On the far left of your screen is the Union Pacific Steam on Twitter. So they just went to Omaha, and on the way to Omaha, their Twitter account did show updates on where they've been stopping, and sometimes there was video and photos of their stops, so that was pretty nice and helpful. Otherwise, the other thing you can do is follow their Union Pacific Steam Club. What that is, you get emails. So you give them your email address, and they will send you some email updates. And usually they'll give a schedule for an upcoming excursion several days before the general public gets it. So that way it's nice, because you have time to, okay, can I actually go chase? What days? Where do I need to find a lodging? And it gives you a little extra time to find some hotels. Some of these towns, like Sharon Springs, for example, have hardly any lodging. And then you have to like go up into Goodland, Kansas to get lodging. So if you get notified early, it gives you a little extra time to find a hotel room close by. But sometimes it's okay to have a hotel room a little further out if you don't plan on being at their stop first thing in the morning to watch them do maintenance and steam it up and get ready to go for the day. Also on the Union Pacific Steam website is the tracking map. This last excursion going to Omaha, at first it was not working correctly, and then it seemed to have a little bit of a delay. And I think it might have popped back up, but I'm not 100% sure, because I think it happened after I was done chasing it for a few days. Darn jobs, had to go back to work. They get in front of all the fun stuff, don't they? But it's a nice little thing to know, like, okay, has it stopped somewhere yet? Is it anywhere close to where I'm gonna be set up? So it's a good thing to watch. And then also on the same site is their map of all the towns and where they're going to be stopped and such. So that is a good idea to know. Do you want to be at that town as they stop to do when their little whistle stops, where they do some maintenance, let people take pictures? Sometimes you can actually talk to the guys on the crew and ask questions. It just kind of depends on how long is the stop and how much maintenance do they have to do at that stop. Chasing to North Platte this last time, I stopped in Albin, Wyoming. I was going to go to LaGrange, but when I drove through LaGrange, there was no parking anywhere close by, and I have a bad knee, so I didn't really want to walk that far, so I just moved on to another stop near Scotts Bluff. Some of my friends were at the LaGrange stop and have great pictures and video, and others went to some other stops after that to catch some run-bys. So it's up to you on how you want to do your video and how do you want to do your photos. It's your story to tell. But it is really fun to have pictures of not only the locomotive, but it's kind of cool to sometimes just to have how many people were there to see it. What were the guys doing? Who was there from the crew? They usually have pilot crews with them and other UP employees and such. So it's kind of fun just to say who was who. And they've gone through Nebraska quite a few times now. So I'm starting to recognize some faces of the guys that are at a lot of the same stops in Nebraska. I kind of feel like I almost need to ask their names so I know who they are and I can like say who they are in all my photos online. But I did not do that this last time, and now I'm kind of kicking myself for it. So they keep that into consideration. Maybe have a little notebook to take notes on who's there and what people are doing. But this was Cozad. My friend and I, we had stopped kind of off the bridge, ran up as the train came down the track. We could see it pretty far down the track. We got some photos and video of it coming down and then we took off and went down. We ended up being over on the left side of the engine down there to watch the guys do some maintenance and work. And I got a couple of good shots of John Stravino and Jimmy Thompson waving and smiling at me. So I've posted those in the past. So it's just kind of cool when the guys will look at you and give you a wave and a smile for your photo and video. Just keep in mind, where are you at taking your photos? You don't want to be on railroad property and trespassing without permission kind of deal, because you don't want to get in trouble doing this or get other people like kicked off the property in the future kind of deal. Here was a day in 2022 where friends and family of the crew got to be in the Challenger car and go from Cheyenne down to Denver. And then we had to come back up to Cheyenne that night while the train was down in Denver. So it was a pretty fun day. So we had permission to be on the property. This is right outside the roundhouse. And on the other side of the train that you can't see, and further down, I forget what cars they were, but some dignitaries were on the train and some of the other cars. So our car was strictly just friends and family of the crew. It was really fun to meet people I haven't met, and then the people I know, it was fun to hang out with them and talk to them. It was a good time. There's a whole different way to experience the train. It was really fun to see all the rail fans up and down the roads into Denver the whole way down. And at our stop in Greeley, it was cool to see how huge of a crowd it was on a Thursday afternoon. Since it was a weekday, I didn't know how many people would be down in Greeley to see the train come through, but there's quite a few. I got to see quite a few people I knew and people at the Colorado Model Railroad Museum that I happen to know, so it was really fun. Here is where we were on an Amtrak platform in Omaha, watching Big Boy back down tracks and come back up a few different times. They were taking the train to the Durham Museum. So next morning they had an excursion with, not excursion, what do you call it? Like a ticketed ride with passengers. And when they sell tickets, that money is a fundraiser for the Union Pacific Museum in Council Bluffs. It's in downtown Council Bluffs in an old library. It's a really cool building on the outside. It's beautiful on the inside. It's a very well done museum. That museum does not charge admission. They do ask for donations. They have a donation box at the front and a small little gift shop. So they need as many donations as they can get to operate and be open to the public. So I definitely recommend that museum if you're a really big fan of Union Pacific. Go to Council Bluffs, Iowa, and find the Union Pacific Museum. So this particular picture, I was told by a couple of guys on the crew that they were sent down the wrong track at one point. So it took a little longer to go back and forth up and down the track to get on the right one. And then they had to like disconnect some stuff like that. So it's just really cool to see the whole entire process. And it took quite a while. I think I have over half an hour worth of video on it. So it was really hot out that day, and thank goodness we were in the shade. Otherwise, it would have been really miserable. What you can't see is above the train is a bridge, and there was a huge line of people watching from up on the bridge. It was so hot, and I can't imagine how hot that engine going underneath it made it. Because as you can see, some heat refraction on the top of the engine there, and then the steam that comes up over the bridge when you're standing there. It's hot. I've been on another bridge when it went under, and holy cow, I knew it'd be warm, but I didn't realize it'd be that warm. So if you don't like heat, don't be on a bridge over the engine. Although it's a really cool view. So we're back to Lyman, Colorado. Seeing different guys do things to the engine for maintenance. Here is Austin Barker. I don't know if that's Jimmy Thompson or Troy Plagg next to Austin. Austin's in the white hat. It's either Troy or Jimmy in the yellow hat. Just doing their maintenance and stuff. So I got to watch them bring a bunch of stuff on that little green cart that's kind of next to them. Bring that down, take stuff off. Guys took what they needed and they just scurried off to where they needed to go. They just know right where they're going. Sometimes they have a little bit of conferring about what they need to do and work on, and off they go. Here is a display day in July 2019 in Omaha. This is before they went to the Durham Museum. So as you can see, Kurt Clark on the very far left coming through. His clothes are fairly clean. Austin Barker's are talking to some guys and bands. So these guys, they do a tad bit of maintenance on these days, just depending on the day. And then they also are there just to chat with people, talk about the engine, answer questions. Some people can sometimes get up into the cab, just kind of depends on, I think, where they're located and what's going on and who's around to supervise that kind of thing and make sure everyone's safe. So you just have to be careful. You could see kind of behind Kurt Clark's head a big plume of steam. Kind of down by his arm is an orange cone, and there's cones kind of around where all the water is draining off, and I'm assuming it's pretty darn hot for a while, and then probably cools off eventually, but you have to kind of be careful there. But those days are great because it gives you a good chance to get some up close pictures. Like when you go to Cheyenne Depot days, the drivers and the rods, they don't look like this. For depot days, they have them all nice and shiny and pretty. I've heard some of the guys on the crew call it making scrubbies when they clean the rods and stuff, which I thought was hilarious because some of these guys, are like these burly dudes and they make scrubbies to clean up the rods. It made me laugh. But it's just cool to see all the grease. Where does the grease go when it runs? And how you can see it, like just the splatter, you can see the direction the grease is going as it's just hauling butt down the road. I don't know, just something about seeing it dirty like that. Just try to imagine how long did it look like that and how much grease is in there to make the sucker go. I just really like that. Yeah, I don't know why I like it so much, but I just do. We all like something different about our railroading things. So maybe that's something somebody can use to help weather an engine someday. See how did it naturally splash on different things. And like on here, you could kind of see where it gets stuck on different things and some grass it looks like maybe a little bit grass or dirt or something up in the grease a little bit there. I just like the close-up shots of all dirty stuff on the engines. I think it's just really cool. So here comes the Cumbres and Toltec. This chase is a lot different than chasing a big boy. It does have some similarities, but there's quite a few differences. Like both, you really need to have your supplies and your gear ready to go. So each one, like big boy, it just goes so fast. You don't have a ton of time to like, oh, I need to run and charge my equipment. I need to go have a really long lunch. I need to hit the bathroom 5 times a day. There just isn't always that much time if you want to get a lot of shots of big boy. Here at the Cumbres and Toltec, you have your train that goes from Chama to Antonito. And you have a train that usually, I want to say, goes from Osier back to Chama. Then you have your Antonito train down to Chama. So you get a couple of different opportunities throughout the day to get an engine going on the same exact route every single day. So if one day you don't get what you need, you can do it the next day, but you need your supplies because there's nowhere to stop for gas. There may or may not be one place where there might be an outhouse. If, gosh, I can't remember where that was, but don't quote me on that. You have to kind of know, like, where do you go off into the wilderness that might have camping and areas like that that would have this. If you know all that stuff, then you could probably find like a vaulted toilet bathroom. Otherwise, you have to hold it or go behind a bush or something. Hope nobody sees you. But there's no stops for beverages, food, nothing. You need to have it with you. And you are going in different altitudes and different terrain, so you have to have kind of a wide variety of clothing options. Definitely have to have layers and just be ready for any kind of storms that come in because you're at that higher altitude and lightning can be an issue. And Chama is a beautiful town, but sounds like the pandemic did a big number on them and a lot of the food places closed. So there's not a, I think there might be a few more now. I think they're starting to get some more going on, but definitely check into that before you go down. And there's some lodging, but it does book up fast. So you need to find where you're staying early. This is kind of a little map I got off of their website, cumbresandtoltec.com. It kind of just shows a little route that they go. And it's a pretty cool route. Those that are really into the history of this area, you probably know some really good areas to go and recognize some of the spots. So those of us that might not know as much, I've definitely learned a lot in the last 2 years about this area. It's really easy to find a cool photo spot. One indication is there's usually a group of people at the cool spots. Like this spot here, there's usually a good group of people waiting for the train to hit this bridge, the Lobato Bridge. There is a fence line, so you can't go past of that, otherwise you are trespassing. And people out here don't fool around with trespassing. So do not trespass out here. Learn on a map beforehand any areas you want to go to. Just make sure you're not going to get in trouble trespassing. So the fall is a gorgeous time to be down at this railroad, as you can see. Down here is where a lot of people who are chasing will turn around. So the engine is approaching a water tank in the area called Los Pinos. So it'll stop, take on some water, then it loops back around. It's like a little horseshoe curve here. And then it'll eventually be on the other side of the track, kind of over by where that little house with the like bluish green roof is, and it kind of goes out of view eventually. There is a way to chase it a little bit further on, but you need to have a high clearance vehicle with 4-wheel drive to do so. Otherwise, you're going to have a really messed up car. So that train does go through some gorgeous scenery. So if you're riding that train, this is an example of what you see on the train that you can't see from a road. Because there's no road back here. It'd be a heck of a hike, or if you had permission to ride a horse on someone's property, then you could see this kind of cool thing. But it's just a beautiful ride and beautiful area to chase. Here is a spot people refer to as Kodak Rock, and you could have a couple different views of the train from this rock. So this day sat in a few different areas. I think this was before the train even was close to us. And I just took a few pictures. This is when we're on our way out of town. So here's another good spot where it will stop to take on water, and you can see people lined up in different areas trying to get the photos. Yes, these engines are so much smaller than Big Boy, but you don't want to be too crazy close. One, you'll be in other people's photos, and two, they're not going to be as good of photos when you're only like 5 feet away from the track, like the guy down there by the water spigot. Now, the people up on the hillside are definitely going to have a better photo option. So here, this is how close up you get when they're stopped and doing stuff. People are there talking to the engineer and such. You can see another couple guys walking up there. It's not a real, they don't have like security running up and down the roads. You can't get that close. They expect you to have some pretty good common sense and be safe about it. So you don't want your kids to be running around real close without you right there to watch them. You do need to be smart about your own safety. They do have people who will be at the crossings to help stop traffic, so there won't be any issues, hopefully, people getting hit by the train or hitting the train. So you can see here, that's a truck of somebody who was doing the railroad crossing duty. And here's the engine coming back the opposite way, and people just sitting there watching. I happen to know those fellas, so we were talking quite a while about the area prior to me shooting this photo and the history of it. So it was pretty cool to be out there and just talking to different people and hearing what they know and their knowledge. A good part of rail fanning, I feel like, is you could do it with your friends or you could do it by yourself. But you also just meet people that you can talk to. Sometimes you know them, sometimes you don't. Rail fanning with Big Boy 2 weeks ago, I met all kinds of people I've never met before, learned a lot from them. Here's another really cool place to take a picture in Chama as it comes out of the yard, the first crossing. I was there early enough, so I was able to get a good spot and not too close, and I also use a zoom lens, so I don't have to be close, but I don't have other people in my shot. Zoom lenses are a wonderful thing. If you can have a zoom lens, or if your cell phone has a decent camera on it with a decent megapixels, it's usually not a big deal to zoom in. Here we drove down to Osier and watched the trains come in, and we watched them leave. So it was just a really fun day just to sit there and see what we could see from Osier. All kinds of fun things to do and beautiful locations. Here we had to have really good four-wheel vehicles with high clearance to get here. And it helps knowing how to get there, so you definitely have to look it up on a map and know the way. I don't think I could do it without someone being like, yes, that's the road you need to be on. So I'd have to have someone help me make sure my route was okay before trying it. And when you're down here, you never know what you're gonna see. I had no clue the Galloping Goose was down here. So we were up in an area where you had to have the four-wheel drive cars, and we saw it the first time up there. I wasn't prepared, so my shots didn't turn out that great, but I was ready for when it came down here. And it took a lot longer for it to come back down here than it took us to get down here. So it was just cool to see this number 5 come down. They got out and did some stuff. They got back on and took off again. Again, you could see how beautiful the fall foliage is in the fall. So go down there early October if you want some good colors. So the Chama yard is really cool. So it's an active yard. You have access to it. You can actually walk around, cross the tracks, whereas like somewhere like Durango, you can't really do that. So just be safe about it. Never step on the rail. You always step over the rail. Watch what you're stepping on. Always look both ways. And here we have the surprise of the Colorado Railroad Museum's RGS-20. It was still down here. So they had the Victorian Roundup and all their little fun events in 2021, and RGS-20 had stayed down there. the Rocky Mountain Railroad Club happened to chartered it for that Saturday, and they rode it. And I had no clue this was even down here, so it was great to see because I love the 20. I was in Golden the day it debuted, got to ride it the first ride that morning. It was just awesome to see it down here where it could go on a much longer ride and just to see it in more of like a natural habitat for the engine. The Argia is in its natural habitat. I think she's just a cute little engine and just beautiful. So it's just fun to see her all steamed up down there with a different background. I do like to go see her in Golden as well. So here you get up and close to the engines too. You could take selfies in front of them. Here I am with a little mascot of the Colorado Model Railroad Museum, Mr. Dobbins. He went down there with me. He likes to go on little trips with me. You can watch all kinds of preparations get ready down here at the Chama Yard. Here we are watching the guy go back and forth loading coal into the engine. So it's just pretty cool to see that and just to see how long does it really take. So I think the fact that like Big Boy is now converted to oil, I totally understand why, because it would be a pain in the rear end to have to stop all the time to get coal loaded. And I can't imagine if Big Boy had to stop all the time to get its brakes redone. Because one, I don't know how they would do it because you have to have the engine lifted up, I believe, to even access a brake pad. So I could see why they have to have the diesel with it and all the extra cars to help with the braking. Because those brake pads look like a total pain in the rear end to change out. Whereas like here, they have so many staff at the little shop, it's easy for them to go back and forth to do their brake pads. Whereas Big Boy, you know, they have the FRA say, nope, you can't run because this brake pad, they're kind of dead in the water, impeding other freight traffic. Kind of a bad thing. So while you're down in Chalma, you can also walk around the yard and see what other equipment they have. Get some cool pictures. As long as you're not like climbing on it and going in stuff, they're pretty cool if you're just getting up close to it to look at it. Like you could get up like right next to it and take a really close-up shot, like a foot away if you need to, as long as no trains are coming right next to you, they're going to hit you, you're good. So as long as everybody is respectful, I'm pretty sure they'll continue to let people have good access down here into the yard. That's kind of what makes it a little more unique and magical yet, is seeing everything close up and imagining what it would be like to see that every single day. How cool would that be? It's just cool to also just be down there and see the smells, and every year see where are things sitting this year versus last year, and what's changed from the year before. Has something been painted differently? Has maintenance been done differently? Here is one of the very popular spots that people like to stop to get photos. So I had to be careful to try to shoot around people. Here in Chama, there isn't as much of a photo line like I see with Big Boy. Big Boy people are usually pretty good at having a really good photo line. Here, people just kind of go wherever. So I just think it's nice to try to keep in mind, like, are you going to be in somebody's shot or not? Just out of common courtesy, because we're all there to enjoy the same exact thing. Why make someone mad at you if you can just step back a little bit and still have a cool picture? So again, it's good to have different kinds of equipment and different lenses. Another great reason. So you never know how many people are going to be around and what obstacles do you need to shoot around. So there was, I want to say, at least 20 people in this area. It was pretty easy to shoot around them with a zoom lens. So when you come down to Chama, it's a gorgeous drive as you drive through the mountains to get down there. You don't have to really go crazy fast because you're going to miss something. Hopefully you gave yourself enough time to get down there, that is. Definitely the day before is what you need to do because the train leaves pretty early. So if you want to be on the train or get photos of the trains before they take off, you get there early. And here in this picture, you could see where it says a hotel, shops, all this stuff is right there across the street from the rail yard. So a lot of these places you could sit outside of and watch what's going on down in the yard from. And it's good to just get down the yard early in the morning, see what the guys do to prep for the day. I mean, a lot of it is very similar to what they're doing for Big Boy. And I got to make sure there's water, things are greased correctly, everything's looking good and sounding good to you. And the guys make sure everything's proper and safe, and then they head on out. So it's just good to know where in town you want to stay so you're well rested before the night before, because lodging does book up quickly. There is an RV park not too far away. It's kind of between the rail yard and that first crossing a few pictures back. So that, I don't know how quickly they get full or costs or anything, but it's definitely something you need to take into consideration. Where are you going to stay? Now, some people who like to leave from Antonito will stay in Alamosa, and that's a little bit of a drive to get to Antonito from Alamosa, so just be aware you need to get up earlier for that one. Because if you miss the train, you don't really have another spot to go to where you can get back on the train and back to your car. Like in Durango, I've seen where people miss it and they go down to Rockport, park their car, hop on the train, and they get back to their car later. But here, there's none of that. And with Big Boy, there's a lot more places to stay, usually in the bigger towns. Whereas Chama, it's a little tougher. But when you go online and you just look up Chama, New Mexico, lodging in Chama, New Mexico, restaurants, you get a couple different websites from the city and town and their tourism thing. Here's just one of them. Visit chama.com. And when you click on the top where it says businesses, I'll kind of go through like restaurants, hotels, shopping, so on and so forth. There is a grocery store in town on the other side of town. So if the restaurants are closing, hopefully the grocery store is still open. You can go get something there. So here's just kind of a little wrap up summary of some things about Big Boy and Chama that are different. So they both are a long day each way. It's just one, you have to cover a heck of a lot more territory, and one has designated stops for the train with Big Boy, whereas Cumbres and Toltec only stops at the couple places take water. They also take on water at Sublet. That's not a very easy one for people to get to. I have done it before, so it is doable, but there's just not a lot of room for people to get down and do that. So both ones, you just need to make sure you have the right gear. Everything's charged and ready to go. You have plenty of fuel, plenty of snacks, so on and so forth. I won't read the whole thing to you. I'm pretty sure you all can do that. So I'll just give it a little minute for you all to kind of look through. But both of them are very fun railroads to chase. I enjoy both of them. I feel like I see a certain group of friends and people chasing Big Boy more than the Cumbres and Toltec. It's funny to like, there's a lot of guys on YouTube who chase Big Boy, but I think they also go to Cumbres and Toltec, but it's more sporadic when they go, so they don't like see each other as often. Whereas chasing Big Boy, this last time I was talking to my friend Nick Valdez, who's got a really good YouTube channel with videos, and he was telling me about all these other railroad YouTubers and who he's seen on the road and where he saw them, and some of them have crazy amount of followers. So there's some really good YouTubers out there who have great footage of Big Boy on a lot of their excursions. So if you want to see a lot of Big Boy videos, YouTube is going to be a very good friend of yours. So when you're out on about for each one, you definitely need to watch out for sunburns. I do not sunburn bad. I've had like maybe 24 in my life, or 25. I had a little one a few weeks ago. So bring a hat. Sometimes I have a baseball cap. Sometimes I wear a wide-brimmed hat like you see in the photo. Sunglasses are great. Sunscreen is great, especially like when you're in Chama, it's cloudy and overcast a lot, and you don't necessarily think you're going to get a sunburn, but you do, even when it's cloudy, just because you're at a higher elevation than you are, say, in Nebraska or Kansas chasing big boy. So just make sure you have that. Hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. Even it's hot, you don't want to pass out. I'm just going to kind of go into some items I like to have with me, or that I've seen people have something similar to. I have this exact scanner. I want to say I bought it cheaper than I'm seeing on here. So I just pulled some screenshots off the internet on these products. So this scanner, I was able to buy it online. I found some good YouTube videos on how to work it and how to program them. And they told in the YouTube videos, they tell you what website to go to get the different radio frequency. Oh, I feel like that's the wrong wording. Like when you're chasing big boy, for example, you'll see a Greeley Hazelton on the screen, or Greeley LaSalle, stuff like that. It'll show you like what area is the channel coming from. And you could program that in. You could program like Colorado, Nebraska. I believe I have Colorado, Wyoming, Nebraska, Kansas. I can't remember if I've done any other states. I probably should, because if they ever go west, I'm going to need some Utah and some Idaho, Nevada, California, Oregon. Hopefully they'll get going that way, because that would be awesome to see them in some gorgeous country out there. Seeing Big Boy go through the Yoder sub was awesome, because it's just hilly. You got some cool bluffs. Just a gorgeous, beautiful view. There's some areas it's harder to see the engine from the road, but that I felt that was okay. The gorgeous areas where we could have Big Boy in a really cool background for a photo or a video totally made up for the stretches where we can't really see the train. I was very impressed with it. I hope Ed Dickens can do the Yoder sub again if they go east anytime in the next few years, because that was gorgeous. I'm kind of bummed they're not taking that way home, because they're going just straight down the Highway 30, kind of the railing that goes through there. But the other way is gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. Do the Yoder sub, even if Big Boy's not going through there. If you like diesels, you could still get some really cool, beautiful shots out in that area. But the scanner is a great scanner. Sorry, I totally got off subject there. Some people even put on the roof an antenna that like sticks on the magnet, and we have it plugged in to their scanner in the car, so you get even further range. And that's cool. When a buddy of mine we were chasing the rotary plow back in March, we actually were able to hear a lot more because of that. It's those that are photographers know you got to have your SD cards. I like a really good sturdy SD card case that keeps dirt and grime out, because sometimes things fall out into the dirt. You're in the dirt a lot of these places, or if it's windy or something, you need to make sure your cards aren't going to get all gross and get compromised to where they become corrupt and they don't work, and then you have lost all your shots. I've seen a lot of different photographers have differing opinions on what type of SD card you should have. How many gigabytes should you have? Some want very large gigabytes, some want smaller, because if it gets corrupt, you're only losing like 30 or 64 gigabytes, not like 200 and some. So it's really just, what do you feel comfortable having? How well do you know what you're doing with your equipment? And are you taking good care of your electronics, like your SD cards? Do you clean your camera, or do you like it really dirty and stay dirty? That kind of thing. I hope everyone is taking good care of their stuff, because it's not cheap. I know that for sure. I would love to upgrade my equipment. My cameras, my main one's at least 10 years old, and I would love a better one, but yeah, over $1,000 right now is not going to happen. I need a new lens too. One thing some friends started doing is using walkie-talkies when we're in different cars. That is a huge game changer. I've not tried that until this year, and that was cool. I watched some friends do that prior, When some other friends were out in the Colorado, Wyoming area from Australia, I heard they were all using walkie-talkies, and it worked really well. And then we tried it when chasing Big Boy. It was awesome. So we had 2 of them had walkie-talkies and plenty of extras to share. So I was in a car and there were like at least 2 other cars had walkies, and we were all just on the same channel. So as long as we could see each other, they for the most part worked really well. So we tried to choose a channel that was a little obscure and hopefully not one that a lot of people would be using. And that worked fabulous. We were able, the person that had a second person in their car helping with navigation stuff was able to like tell everyone on the walkie, okay, to get around this crowd, we're going to go this way. We're going to go this way oh, no, we're not going to go to this stop. Let's try to go down here and get this kind of background, so on and so forth. So the walkies were awesome. Definitely want to do this again if I have friends chasing with me. I will be chasing Big Boy coming back from Omaha, so I'm not sure if I'll have any friends with me. I'm hoping I do. This is one of those little sandbags you just throw over this. You have your car window down, you throw it over the side of your door, and you can just like place your camera on it and your lens, and it kind of helps stabilizes it, and it kind of saves your arms and stuff. But you have to be at the right angles to really have this happen. But if you're somebody who it's hard for you to get in and out of a car, like with my bad knee, I was definitely hurting on my trip chasing last time from getting in and out of the car. This kind of thing does help a lot. I have one in my car. I use it a lot for wildlife photography too. So your car is a fabulous blind to keep the animals from getting so scared of you. I could have a whole nother presentation easily on wildlife photography. But videos, I use my cell phone. Some people are using GoPros or other types of camera equipment. I usually take my cell phone and I have it on some kind of a tripod, and I usually just have it aimed at something and I just hit play and walk away. But this one, for example, has a little remote that comes with it. So sometimes you can get the the tripod and the remote for your camera on your phone in a bundle like this. That's a cool thing. I have a friend, Bruce, he uses his Apple Watch to start and stop his videos. And I'm like, I need that. So I was just kind of playing around on the internet looking up another way to be able to do that myself without an Apple Watch. And I found this, and I also found where you could buy just a remote for your cell phone to start and stop video. And supposedly it should work for iPhones and Androids. There's a lot of options out there. I just did a quick Amazon search and found a ton of stuff. So just make sure you're reading through the fine print on what kind of phones it works on and that kind of stuff. So you don't want to buy one and not have it work. I have a little tripod like this. It has bendable legs. It is awesome. I was able to like wrap it around signs and fence posts and goofy things for stabilization to get some cool videos. When Big Boy did their test run down in the Spear, Wyoming area, I had found a sign. I wrapped it around, started the video, walked away to take my photos, came back, grabbed the camera. It was a pretty cool video. The only bad thing is, like, if you're shooting a camera while a video's going, if you're close, all your gets in your video. So a lot of my videos do have that, but not all. So that's just definitely one thing to keep in mind. So I hope you have really enjoyed my presentation. I do a lot of the photography and videography just for fun because I enjoy it, and I know there's people out there who are not able to do the chasing that everyone else can do for various reasons, whether it's jobs or it does cost money for gas and lodging and food, and you have to have the right equipment. It gets expensive. But I know me and a lot of other people do share all of our stuff on social media. So definitely just find us out there. I'm on YouTube under Rail Graphics. I'm on Instagram and Facebook under Rail Graphics as well. So just find us out there when you do your searches for different railroad terms. There's a ton of people out there with content out there wanting to share it with people. I do it because I like it. I'm already out there. And I know my, like, for example, my younger brother, he can't be out there with me taking videos and stuff, so he can at least watch what I'm sharing. So if other people are enjoying it, then that's awesome and it works for me. If you have questions or anything, feel free to find me on social media, send me a direct message. Sometimes it might take me a while to get to it because of my jobs and such. Just give me time to answer, or you can even message me on email at railgraphics@proton.me. It's kind of a different type of mail server. I was having too many issues with Google, so I gave up on having a Gmail, and I went with Proton for my training videos and photos. So thanks for watching, and we'll hopefully see you again. Bye-bye.
All righty then. Well, thank you very much, Jennifer, for all of that interesting information. Jennifer isn't with us here this evening in the studio, so if you want to get in contact with her, find her contact information right there on the last slide and reach out for her directly. Boy, that was really outstanding. Got to put those things on your bucket list. Okay, after this short break, we'll be right back with more clinics. All right, we're back. Our next presenter is an avid fan and a modeler of the Great Northern Railway. He lives in the Cascade foothills east of Seattle. He is a frequent contributor to Model Railroader and the Great Northern Railway Historical Society. He's an active member of the NMRA's 4th Division of the Pacific Northwest region. He regularly hosts operating sessions and clinics and layout tours. Our next presenter, please help me welcome Lee Marsh. Lee, how are you tonight?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And
all right, we're anxious to hear what you have to share with us, so have at it.
thank you. Yeah, it's a great honor and a pleasure to be presenting this to the group tonight. So, as you mentioned, I modeled the Great Northern Railway over the Cascade Mountains in Washington State of the U.S. So I know we have some international folks perhaps on the line. So we're in the upper left corner of the contiguous United States.
All right, let's do it.
Let's see. There we go. Can you see the next slide, Lee?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. So what drew me to the Great Northern is its eclectic power. You see this large articulated locomotive on the left. It was on the previous slide. Some of the diesels of the transition era and the electrics that they ran over the Cascade Mountains. Additionally, the mountain setting and mainline operation. So that's why I got into this particular location and railway. So tonight we're going to go over first concept, talk a bit about trains that I run, routing with the layout, how it's put together, and operations, and then I'll spend some time on construction. It's built with hard shell scenery, which is perhaps a bit unusual these days, but it works well for me. Got a lot of staging underneath. I'll show you how that works. And then we'll go to selected photos from the layout and show you a bit of how I've captured the problem or overcome the problem of depth of field, the holy grail of model railroad photography, and that is getting focus over the full depth, and then finish with just a few lessons learned and what's next. So this slide shows an overview of the layout. It's runs along one side of the wall, is L-shaped, and built on hard shell. And then you see two different helices, one in the foreground, one off in the distance. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. First, I'll give you a track plan, and that's shown here from when the layout was published 2020 in Model Railroader. You see the L shape. It's on the long leg is 32 feet, on the short leg is 12 feet, has a yard in the foreground, and then a long stretch up above that that's another 8 inches higher along the top, and then two helices on the ends, and then below some run-through staging with turning loops and two different stub-ended yards that help me provide the trains that I want to run. And then down on the bottom, you see the train, the fast mail that GN ran in the 1950s. My era is 1951, and that is looking into the L, the angle of the L there toward the corner of the room. We'll talk about how we achieve that look in a little bit. So I have to pay homage to Jack Parker and his NP layout from the 1995 Great Model Railroads. I really drew a lot, shamelessly took a good bit of his layout track plan, and we stand on the shoulders of giants in this hobby. So give Jack some credit here. I'll march you down with a series of photos just to get a little bit more of a close-up look of what the layout looks like from the front. This is a little bit further down than the last photo. And if we move a little further into the yard, you see this in the yard stretched out, double-ended yard here in the foreground. You see that upper level of track, control panel, car card boxes, that sort of thing. And then moving a little further down, looking across the yard, you see the control panel, which actually I built. This was all cab control in the beginning, and in 2003 I changed over to DCC, so that had to be integrated with the existing control panel. It worked out pretty well. And we can look around to the corner with the engine service facility on the right and the blob John Armstrong called it. For the helix on the left, see the upper level coming out of that helix, and then the lower level going off into 2 tunnels. And we'll talk a bit about how that configuration is set up shortly. So first, I'm going to give you a little bit of the background of the Great Northern, which was started, and CEO was James Hill, and his concept was to build revenue as he went. Didn't have any land grants, so wanted to generate traffic, and so he called this part of his railway the rake. And the head of the rake was the line along Puget Sound, along the coast here, inland coast, Puget Sound, from Vancouver, BC to Seattle and south to Portland, was the head of the rake. The handle of the rake went from Everett back to St. Paul, all across the northern tier of the US. And so what I'm doing is modeling Everett, which is where these 2 pieces come together. So how to put this into a layout. And on the left is a schematic of the actual track in Everett. And originally this line coming in from the east was built around a peninsula. So it went up to where Delta Y is and then back down the left side. And then eventually they added a tunnel under the town of Everett, and that's shown in the lower part. The Everett passenger station was on the left-hand side where the line from the tunnel and the line along the bay there connected, and then Delta Yard, which is a big freight yard, was on the other side. And so in my operations scheme, modeling this, and then I use colors to describe movements of cars that move, say, north to Vancouver would be blue, south to Seattle would be red, to the east, green. If it's a local moving east up to the Cascade crest and perhaps just beyond, purple. And then I also host trains from the Northern Pacific, which had trackage rights through Everett, and that's shown in yellow. And the Milwaukee line, Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul, and Pacific, you see the initials below, that road also had operations in Everett, and so we host trains from that line as well. The trains that I'm modeling in 1951 are listed here. There's quite a few of them for as small a layout as this is. So the passenger trains are Fast Mail, which was one of my favorite trains. The Empire Builder, which I think many people are familiar with, certainly the lightweight version that came in 1947 with the orange and green scheme. The Oriental Limited in that same time used the pre-war Empire Builder cars and were heavyweight cars. Cascadian ran from Seattle to Spokane. The International ran from Seattle to Vancouver and got lightweight equipment in 1950. And so there's a very short window of time when you had lightweight International and the heavyweight Oriental Limited. And so that helped set the time at 1951. But it was a great combination of equipment as well, because you still saw steam, diesel, and the electrics. The freights are the time freight, the West Coaster coming from the east, Twin Cities. It's comparable train going to the east. Fruit forwarder, there was a lot of fruit just east of the Cascade Crest. And then local, or well, not locals, but blocks that ran from Vancouver, BC, ultimately all the way down to Los Angeles. And those blocks and the trains that they ran in were called the GWS and the SWG, or the George Washington Special, or the SWIG. And the initials came from the Great Northern, its partner, the Western Pacific, and the Santa Fe, all set up to compete with UP and SP. And then the locals, I run a GN Oiler that ran up from Seattle to Delta and back. Trains that originate in Delta run up to, say, Bellingham, or up toward the Cascade Crest and the Sky Valley turn. Northern Pacific trains, the Darrington Logger, and others that ran to Sumas, and then Milwaukee. So the core operation of this from a freight perspective are transfers of blocks of cars and the service, the industries they service, and then a host of local trains. So this set of photos here shows the Oiler that had come up from Seattle and Interbay Yard. That train is setting out a block of cars on the right excuse me, and then we'll pick up a block for return for the return trip to interbay, and you've got a switcher there on the left that's ready to help those cars into the train for the return trip. So the schematic of how this works generally from this rake analogy with its different colors, as I've shown here, and the modeled areas are in these squares. Everett, where the yard is, and the passenger station, and then the upper level where we see the mountain crossing. And so, the simplest thing was with this layout, if I could add return loops on each one of those elements of this track plan or this cross, I would just put the return loops there. But then how do we put that into the actual room? So going back to that actual Everett schematic that's shown here on the left. And if you think about pulling that as with, say this was string, you could actually stretch that out with Delta Yard on one side, and the Everett passenger station on the other, and then the line up to Vancouver and south to Seattle on one end, and then east to St. Paul on the other. And then if we took that and look at the bigger picture of how the layout's put together, I mentioned the return loop. So we have a near east return loop here between the two sides of Everett. And then adding the lines to Seattle and Vancouver, the red and the blue, back into staging. And then with staging's return loop, using the same loop on the far right-hand side, we can tile this together. And then the upper level takes off from the bottom of the helix on the left side, which is right there in the red, also coming from Seattle. You go up the helix, go across the upper level, come down the helix on the right, and then into Everett from the right. So that's how we route trains here. It's worked, I think, fairly well. Then the main staging is at the top of the graphic here. There's through staging, 5 tracks up there, and then there are 2 other stub-ended yards, Bayside Yard, which is shown on the left, and just a stub-ended staging yard shown on the right. I'll show you some more images of this to help you figure this out in just a minute. And then the visible areas are below the dashed lines that are shown on these 2 graphics. So there's a lot of staging, a lot of hidden trackage, but it's all about staging trains in and out of Everett. So it's almost a British concept in that sense, where you've got a main focus of visible areas, and then off to the sides, ways to stage trains into that area. So this is a shot looking along that main 5-track double-ended staging. And you see all the locomotives facing toward you. All trains exit in one direction, whether they're coming from St. Paul from the east, coming from Vancouver, or coming up from Seattle. They all exit this staging yard in the same direction. So that keeps a smooth flow of trains during an operating session. I've got, because of the amount of hidden track, I've got a closed circuit TV with 4 cameras that helps the operators out at the control panel and at Everett see what's going on. You can also walk around one side and duck under the other to get back into these areas, but find that the closed circuit TV really helps. And a few years ago, I converted from black and white to color. And with that was also better resolution. The cameras are so much better today than they were a few years ago. So then back to that staging area in the back, and you've seen the control panel, and I will tell you at this point that all the turnouts on the layout, virtually all, I'd say 99% of them, are controlled by Tortoise machines. And so they're controlled with a switch, just an electrical toggle switch out on the front panel. But then back in the staging area, I found that, well, often the turnouts weren't aligned correctly or that I needed at that time. And so I've installed this Hostler panel, which basically just reverses the polarity to the Tortoise machine. And that allows the operator in the back picking up their train, for example, to set a turnout if it's not turned aligned correctly for them. And then when you leave, you set all the toggles as is seen here in the up position, and that makes the panel out on the front indicate the correct uh, alignment for the switch. And then you see some car card boxes that are slung off the bottom of the Hostler panel. So this is where, say, a road crew would pick up their car card pack for a train coming from one of the 3 points. Then I'm aware you can't read all the text on this, but this is just an example of an Excel spreadsheet that I put together for each lineup for each session that shows the order we'll run trains in. It shows basically where they're coming from, where they're going. So the destination sets the color. So for instance, the top train there, the Empire Builders, westbound's coming from St. Paul, going to Seattle. So the train number and its direction is in the color of the terminus, and the two colors on the right-hand side help people stay aligned of where trains are going. Then there's the power, number of cars in the trains, if they're set outs, that sort of thing, and then a description of the work the train's to do. So dispatching the layout, which I say here, this is true, it's a clash of time and space. I've got this yard, and the yard takes the time it takes. Time does not really scale in the yard. The train run time, on the other hand, is very short. And so you can get a train from staging into the yard very quickly. So it's easy to blow the yard crew out in terms of having trains pile up. So the way we overcame that is to call this event driven, and the yard master is the one who actually calls for the next train. So we're not running with a fast clock. We are letting the yard master call for a train. The dispatcher will issue warrant control for the road crew to bring the train around. And then do use some essentially no work trains like these passenger trains that come through. They might pick up or set out, say, a reefer, express reefer, or something like that, but there's really not much work. So they add to the interest. So here's a operating crew at work. In this, you see from left to right, one switch crew. Um, then in the next person with the black vest is the yard master. The person beyond him in the blue is the other switch crew, and then the last fellow is the road crew. And so the switch crews work from either end of this double-ended yard and can hand cars back and forth with one another, and it works out pretty well in terms of the workflow. And then we have just conventional car cards, waybills that are micromark. I just fill them out by hand. You see the color at the top of the car card telling you which direction the car is going. That helps greatly. And then I've got a train brief written to describe what work the train does, and then a routing card that shows with this complex track work where the train is to run. So that would be the package that the road crew gets. And this just shows a close-up of that first card. And then the green card is, especially for a longer train, would say no work, say, behind this card, or all the work is behind this card. I have two different flavors. So if the cars are blocked at the end or the front of the train, it gives the yard master and the switch crews a little bit of easier time of which car cards do they need to deal with. Here's another example of back towards staging where we've got this Bayside yard, which existed in Everett, is used to take some of the heat off of the main yard in terms of storage of cars, and also represents industries like the Weyerhaeuser mills that are around Everett. So that little yard is back here, and you access this by just walking around the edge of the layout. Then I mentioned these passenger trains. So I've got some drawers that they're kept in, keeps them out of the way. You never have enough staging. So this came later of how to put on trains and take them off if they're not really doing a lot of work, just running around the layout. So here you've got the Cascadian, this is a dark green color, and one in the top drawer, the International, which is just 4 cars long, and then the heavyweight Oriental Limited down below. And you may have guessed at this point, you see a little icon that shows a key plan of the 32 by 12 L-shaped layout, and then the little arrow is where we're looking, where the perspective of the camera. And you see one of the closed circuit, actually two of the closed circuit TV cameras up there at the top of the slide on the left, and then just to the right of the middle of the slide. It's a shot of the Cascadian with Class 2 mountain power on the head end and the 4 cars, heavyweight cars that it pulls, and so just a sense of the how these look on the layout. So let's now move and talk a bit about the layout construction. So I started this in December of '95, and you see the portion of the layout that we first looked at in that very first slide. This is the bench work for it underway, conventional L girder bench work, wood framing. You see the helix at that end under construction. And then as I went, I used paper mock-ups to visualize what the area would look like, and kind of tweaked my ground form according to what that paper mock-up looked like. This is another version, the early portion of the layout construction. I first built it and it was easy to build, but it was a bit lower than it is now. And I actually raised the layout 12 inches up to 51 inches above the floor, which is a much better height now. And I did that by just screwing some eye bolts into the joist above and using some climbing gear and all thread to raise the layout. And I just ran around underneath the layout, turning nuts with a wrench, and I could have run trains the whole time that I was lifting this. It just went nice and smoothly and slowly. Then the right-hand photo shows a bit of the upper level uh, constructed, and then an early version of the control panel before it was painted down on the front of the layout, all built out of wood. This shows some of the hard shell that was constructed. There's an aisle and this portion of the layout. So looking toward the wall there's an aisle that you can duck under to. And these are lift out panels that are shown there. They're hot glued together, cut out with a jigsaw, used aluminum screen wire to define the ground. And then covered that with Woodland Scenics plaster cloth, and then plaster, kind of soupy plaster on top of that. Uh, and that you can see off to on the right hand side here. And from this perspective, you can see how much area is underneath the hard shell. It's a ton of volume that I have used for staging. This shows an example of the helix. One of the helices happens to be the helix at the far end of the layout. So you see that in the little key plan down to the right. And this is pretty simple, actually. I built a square and then put in some 45s and made an octagon out of it, and then used 2x2s to attach to that, and that became the supports for the helix that's then supported on plywood cut out with a jigsaw. It's a tight radius because of the size of the room. That's always been a challenge. It's a 24-inch radius. Means I do a lot of work with my rolling stock to get it to operate, and locomotives. It's a 2.7% grade, just straight calculation, but if you compensate that for the curve, it's 4%. So a steamer cannot go up this. The diesels and the electrics are the ones that use the helices. And you see access in the middle, just duck under, you can get into all this. Every bit of track on this layout is accessible for maintenance and that construction, that sort of thing. And you see again this reefer block stored here because it really is a no work train, so we just run it sporadically. The backdrop I painted using acrylic paints and photos from the Cascade Mountains. So the photo in the upper left is taken in early June from a peak just above the Great Northern Railway. And I use that for color and the massing, the shape. And you see this same mountain that's in the photo taking form here on the right side, on top, and then the finished version down on the left. And before I've added trees and completed all the ground cover. But this is the first thing I ever painted with acrylics, and you just look at what's in the photo and try to replicate that on this masonite blue backboard that I had screwed up to the wall. This shows a photo of this as it stands today, complete. You see that same mountain massif in the background. In the foreground, it's kind of a decidedly, I think, alpine feel because it's not super dense trees, which the actual line over the Cascades is in the trees. You can hardly see much of the line at all as it runs through the forest. But up at the higher elevations in the Cascades, you get this sort of more open area, and that's what I've elected to use for the scenery right up to the track. And it does set a great feel. People compliment it all the time that, this looks like the Cascades. So it's been successful in that regard. And then looking directly into this corner of the backdrop in this photo, you can see the mountain off in the middle of the photo on the left. And then if you look to the photos on the right, are just how I built and bent the masonite and attached it to the wall and then painted the backdrop on it. Worked out nicely, I think. Then the underworld, the staging and access. So here's the track plan, or a track plan again. And all the orange areas are access locations, whether they're walk around aisles, duck under aisles, or access hatches, or the interiors of the helices. And so down below, you see me on the left taking a photograph through one of the access hatches that drops down. I'll show you how that works in just a few. And then a photo looking along the duck under aisle that's on the back on the right-hand side of the layout. And you can see how staging is kind of oriented next to that area, and the bottoms of the lift out hatches. Panels. Here are the lift out panels that I just mentioned, that same area that we just looked at. And this helps you kind of see the relationship of the track and staging down below, and the relationship of that upper level track that runs across the layout that represents the Cascade crossing. And you see the 5-track staging to the right and of this left-hand photo, and you see the 3-track stub-ended yard with trains kind of weaving through the supports for the upper level. And after I built the upper level, and after I built the hard shell, I realized how much volume was under this, and that, hey, I could put a staging uh, stub-ended yard here. And so I cut away some of the supports for the upper track, and it worked fine. There's plenty of strength there, and it's given me a lot more flexibility. Then the photo on the right looks 180 degrees in the other direction, back toward the entrance to the room. And you see, again, the upper level, and then also the turning tracks that go around the base of the helix that's in the distance in this photo. This just shows another image looking along the main staging for inbound trains. So all the trains are moving away from you on these 5 tracks in this photo. And then you see one track that's open. So we always keep a clear track open. So as trains come out of Everett and come around the layout, they can then traverse the entire length of the yard, turn at the opposite end where I just showed you that little turnaround around the base of the helix, and then come into one of the 4 tracks that we use to store trains during op sessions. This is the other end. You see that clear track on the left now, and then the other tracks with either a long train or 2 of the short locals there. And then you also see the 3-track Bayside yard off to the right where the hoppers are loaded with aggregate. And then just a photo to give the impression of, the Weyerhaeuser mill is back here. So that's where we would bring logs in, lumber loads out, that sort of thing. This shows an access hatch, same one I was standing in earlier, but the hatch is down here and looking slightly different angle across the yard with nobody in the hatch. so you can see the access to that 5-track staging area. I actually built that as a 4-track staging yard and realized again I had space back there and put the 5th track in through the hatches. So the access has been very helpful. And the right photo shows what looks like from the bottom of one of those hatches, which is pretty simple, just wood framing, plaster cloth on top, and some hinges. And then if I need to, if I'm doing a lot of work there, I can actually take the screws out of the hinges and drop the whole panel, take it to another part of the room and have very unfettered access. And then the blue, people ask whether the blue foam blocks, those are little blocks of insulation foam that are hot glued to the hard shell, and the nails on the bottom of the trees anchor into those little pink foam blocks. So there's a trestle we saw at the very beginning. That's right after you come into the room and turn around the the helix, and this shows the trestle under construction. And I originally used just wood framing to temporarily get the layout up and running and to set the profile grade line and the alignment of the track across this curved trestle, and then literally built the trestle from the top down. So for example, on the far tower, you can see um, the tower's been constructed, had some scratch building, to kit bashing to put the bottom of the tower together to meet the landform, and then it's bolted up to the plywood above with a template that gives me just the right height below the track to ultimately put the horizontal girders in. And then this process allowed me to mark the holes in the plaster cloth where I needed to cut penetrations for the towers that you see in the foreground here. And this worked well. I mean, this has been under construction for a number of years. Finally finished it. Um, got Model Railroader interested in how I did it. So there was an article about that in December 2022 for this trestle. This just shows the Empire Builder crossing that trestle after it was completed. And one of the things that I really liked was not having uh, the landform built to the towers, but the towers built to the landform. So the bases of the towers are all uneven. This is realistic. This shows one of the towers in terms of just the microengineering basic 3 bays at the top, and then the kit bashed bay at the bottom to meet the ground level. And then this is what on the right, what it looks like underneath the hard shell, where I've put some leveling screws and then screw with a fender washer and a big opening in the middle. So I could adjust the tower horizontally, vertically, um, everything. I had all the degrees of freedom were handled there, so I could get the tower where I needed it to be for the alignment. So moving on to the catenary. The catenary is part of, well, how the electric power was provided to the electric locomotives that ran over the Cascades. You see an actual photo of the GN catenary here, and a friend of mine and I, from this photo from Westinghouse, a friend of mine and I built a little 3D model in Google SketchUp, and then 3D printed this using the company Shapeways. And the raw tower is there, the first one on the left with the blue, then painted, and then the cross arm for the bottom that you see in the photos was scratch built then from that 3D printed version, and it worked out pretty well. So I think they look good. Here's an example of the catenary on that upper level. And you see both single and double track here, double track off to the right. And there was a tower, or a pole on either side of the track. And then where you had single track, there was a single pole for the catenary. And I'm not modeling the catenary itself. And my logic goes like this. When you look at photos, if the photos are against the land, as they are this one, in this case, you barely see the wire. If the photos are taken against the sky, then you can see the wire. But omitting the wire lets me clean track, do maintenance, a whole lot of things without worrying about the wire being in the way and collecting dust and so forth. So, and that's my approach. And then to finish up here, I'll walk you through some photos of the layout. And the first thing I want to do is give you a little background of, well, what's behind the photos in the presentation. You've already seen a number of these that were developed using this focus stacking software. I use Helicon Focus, but there are other programs, and I think eventually, or probably our iPhones do it. Maybe they already do it, and I don't know. But what I've done is I use a manual camera. In other words, I can set the exposure, the time, everything, f-stop, and then you can't move the camera during the process. And the only thing you're changing is the focal length. And you take a whole slug of different photos and then use the software to compile the photos, stack them, uh, so you get full depth of field. And this really replicates what your eye accomplishes. When you think about it, your eye is an amazing instrument that the muscles change the shape of the eyeball to focus as you move your eye from near to far. You don't even notice that this is going on, but you do notice that this is going on with a single photo taken, of a model railroad layout. You just see a small depth of field, and the photo screams model. So I use 10, sometimes maybe even 20 photos. It just depends on the conditions. And you don't need a lot of extra light. You can use the ambient light on the layout, and you just need proper exposure, and you may need more photos. And the results are nice, I think. And so let me show you a series here. This is a really tough model photo to take. You're looking along a train, it's going away from you. With a single photo, it's really tough to get anything reasonable here. And so I had about a dozen photos of this particular train, and you'll see those dozen compiled with the focus stacking here in just a second. But I'm going to walk you kind of through some examples along the way. So this first one is we've got the near field in focus, and this caboose is only inches away from the camera lens. And the focal length, what's in focus here, is very narrow. And so it takes a lot of photos to get say, this caboose in focus. It doesn't take many to get the far field in focus. But I've got 3 examples here. Here's the near field, then here's midfield. You see how out of focus now the caboose is, and off in the distance, the focus is still soft. It's not where it needs to be yet. And then here's the far field in focus, this third photo. And so the program takes all these and does its magic to make all of these in focus. And here's the final focus over the entire depth. It's been corrected, like I got rid of, for example, if I go back, you see in the upper left, you see where I didn't mud my joint between my backdrop um, panels, and there's a line. Well, I can get rid of that with Photoshop. And I've corrected a bit of color and cropped this. So this is the final product, and it really pops relative to any of the other photos I just showed you. So the next series of photos that I'm going to show you here, as we end the presentation, uh, are all done with the Helicon Focus. So here's the rear end of the fruit forwarder. So headed to Seattle. So give you a sense of the reefer block here. And this was all done with Helicon Focus. Here's that same area, kind of back in the corner of the L, with 3 of the electrics pulling a freight here, headed eastbound in this case. And I will say that these electrics, I don't have them completely dialed in yet. I'm always working to make them be sufficiently agile on my 24-inch radius. There's nominally a lot of space inside, but with everything that moves inside on the drive system, I've still got some work to really get this dialed in. Full disclosure there. Um, here's its companion, the West Coaster, headed westbound, looking from above in that same location. So westbound fruit forwarder going by an eastbound Twin Cities train. And this particular photo was inspired by a Philip Hastings photo in trains from 1958 that he was riding in cabooses on the SP over Donner Pass in California. And so I tried to replicate this photo on my layout. It was actually published in Trackside Photos in Model Railroader, but I put the camera right up behind a caboose with no cupola, so I could look right over the train. So this gives you the kind of the perspective from sitting in the cupola of an actual caboose. So I do a bit of this trying to replicate photos that I see of actual trains that I think, well, maybe I can recreate that on my layout. Another one that falls into that category, even though I modeled 1951, in 1929, when the first Empire Builder ran through the new Stevens Pass tunnel, was a photo. It's actually, I'll show you in just a second, a photo of that looked very similar to this. So I've tried to replicate that. Now that photo is shown to the left here. Was a Lee Pickett. He was a popular photographer in the Cascades in the early 20th century, and his photo was taken by the Great Northern Railway's press bureau and essentially photoshopped is what we would do today. But it shows here's this was a source photo that I used, and you see my trains backwards from theirs, but that's just the way the layout works. But what's interesting is they took a photo, and the mountain in the background is from about 10, 15 air miles west of the Cascade Crest, called Index Mountain. And they somehow, paste up, airbrush, that sort of mash these two photos together. And you'll notice that there are poles from the catenary that are missing because the catenary is changing angles through the photograph, and you see no poles in the foreground. So this is an early example of what we do now with Photoshop. So this shot just shows the Darrington logger passing through Delta Y and just gives you a different perspective of the engine service area in the roundhouse. There's a Darrington logger crossing that Alpine trestle, and this photo, I was asked to do some photos for the Main Streeter, which is the Northern Pacific Railway Historical Association's magazine, and they liked them and put one on the cover. I retook this photo in a vertical format, but the key point here is that you'll notice that my backdrop has no clouds. It's just blue. And we have days like that in Seattle, believe it or not. Um, but the fact that it's just blue allowed me to Photoshop a lot of room clutter, like an air conditioning duct, out of the upper portion of this photo. That was very easy with the single color background. I think this turned out pretty nicely. And another shot of an FT set bringing the GWS, that's that train from Vancouver through Delta Y into Everett, and then on eventually south. GN in this period built plywood boxcars, painted them a striking orange. So these are modeled after real cars. I think they really pop in terms of their color relative to the scenery here. And then finally, here's the same locomotive I started the presentation with, a Class R2 articulated 2882 running full throttle. I photoshopped some exhaust in here, and this is on one of the 24-inch radii. So if you position the camera right, kind of fool people a bit. Doesn't it looks a little sharp, but I thought it turned out pretty well for a photo. So with that, lessons learned. Well, obviously, I would like broader curves. That's goes almost without saying. But there was a wood stove in the room that set the width of the the room that I could use of combined aisle and helix. And so that is what set the 24-inch radius. I've been glad that I did not rip the wood stove out, because we've used it when we're out of power for a week in the winter out where we live. So that was a good choice. But I was really careful of, following standards very carefully to improve the operation. So that's everything on alignment of track, soldering joints on curves, all that sort of stuff. And then I would say just jump in and try things, because um, they say good judgment comes from experience, which comes from bad judgment. I built some poorly aligned track, not to standards, and ended up having to rip it all out and put in better standard conforming track. So there's nothing you build on a layout that can't be redone if you have to. So just try it and learn as you go. So what am I going to do next? Well, perhaps some additional development of operations. I'd like to add signaling, or at least enough signaling to give you the impression of a signal railroad. And then a number of my friends have proposed that I go down the other side of the room for adding Seattle to the mix, and actually having some of, say Interbay Yard or King Street Station, that sort of thing. So that's possible in the future. So with that, I will conclude and say thank you and take your questions.
Wow, wow, wow. Lee, thank you so much. This thing is stunning. You've really done some amazing work here.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Just, I have enough questions here to talk to you for another 2 hours. So, and I guess I should tell the live stream audience tonight that the chat rooms afterwards are not working. So we won't be able to kind of go to the breakout rooms afterwards. So,
Well, I'm glad I didn't use the full hour then. So that's helpful.
yeah. Well, so all right, let me just fire through some things. When did you start building this, and how long did it take you, kind of from start to where you were sort of finished?
I started building this in 1995, and when we bought this house in '94, and I had in my mind I want to build, a model railroad. I want to have mountain scenery, and frankly, I was not sure would I have the patience to build something like this. So I first built a little 3-foot long diorama, and I spent better part of maybe early 1995 doing that. And so this layout started about Thanksgiving or December or Christmas of '95. And then it's been, I would say, the layout substantially complete maybe 2015, somewhere in there. And then after building it, then I embarked on, well, how do I operate this thing? And so a
Wow.
good friend of mine, Burr Stewart out here, helped me develop an operating scheme that was sort of, the cart was definitely before the horse. So
Wow. Wow.
while I presented this as if it went the other way around, um, it was really how I figured out to put operations in after the fact.
Wow, that's amazing. Not terribly uncommon for layouts that were started in that era, right? That because operations has developed a lot since then. But yeah, it does kind of have a feel like it was built to operate.
Well, and I thank you. That's worked out well. It was built to operate trains through the scenery.
Right. Right.
So it,
Right.
it looks nice. But one of the things that I do struggle with a little bit, but I think I've overcome a lot of it, is there are not many industries on the layout. So you've got this one linear design element, in essence, Delta Yard, a
Yeah.
few industries sprinkled around it. So it I think it works okay, but it's not a industry rich layout like you might see today with a lot of
Sure.
switching and that sort of thing.
Sure. Sure. And how often do you have operating sessions, and how many people does it take?
I've had a pretty steady stream. Well, let me back up and say that it was during COVID that Burr and I worked remotely via Zoom to kind of set up an operating scheme. And then as we came out of COVID, really, I guess 2022, even late 21, where people were starting to get comfortable and we would wear masks, that sort of thing. I started hosting some op sessions, and I host them probably every couple of months. I would guess. I've got other stuff that I'm involved with, so it's not as
Okay.
regular maybe as some of my friends would like, but it's pretty regular. And then I can operate, and so far I've always been the dispatcher. That's going to change. I think this is a layout that would help people new to operations get started as a dispatcher because it's pretty easy to dispatch. But then, in addition to me, I can have anywhere from 2 to 4 people operating this. So the photos I showed full complement of 5 of us: me, the dispatcher, um, 2 switch crews for the yard, 1 yard master, and then a road crew to bring trains around. And
Okay.
people can switch off during the session, so everybody gets to run a train, everybody gets to switch the yard, and if we have anybody glutton for punishment, they can jump in and play the yard master, which is probably the one of the more is the challenging
Right. Right.
operating position for this layout.
Now, I'm curious. So, because you built this diorama first, had you built a railroad before, a layout before this? What was your experience before you jumped into this relatively big project here?
Well, like many of us, my first layout, I was in I think the second grade or something, and it was a Tyco and plywood Pacific, a sheet of
Yeah.
plywood that slid under the bed. And then I changed to in scale and had, again, a flat, small L-shaped layout that I ran with early in scale in the late 60s, early 70s, and then kind of put things away, finishing high school and going to college. And then late in graduate school, some roommates and I built another plywood Pacific, another flat thing, lay a bunch of track around it, and never getting into the scenery portion and the vertical relief.
Right.
And I always had in the back of my mind, I would like to try that. This is the first layout that I tried that on.
Wow. The scenery really is amazing. I think I would have guessed that you'd had, lots and lots of experience with it. It just really looks very authentic.
Well, thank you. And there is a lot of experience I've had with it. That my wife and I moved out to the West Coast in Seattle in 1985, and we got into cross country skiing, hiking, all that sort of thing, and joined a club here, the Mountaineers, where we took climbing classes and did the mountain that you saw in the photos here, which is Glacier Peak. We climbed that. So we spent a lot of time in the mountains, and we have a lot of photos of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
mountains. And the complexity of the scenery was a real focus of mine because we had spent that time in the
Mm.
mountains. So one thing that you see on this layout, you can kind of see it just over the top of the roundhouse in this photo that's still up on the screen, is scree or talus, rock that
Yeah.
has, a
Yeah.
lot of people omit that, but that provides a lot of realism. And then I will say one huge thing that I ran into um, in building this was I found a couple down in Portland who were building trees for the West Coast here, or the Cascades, and that was Canyon Creek Scenics, Pete and Barb Vassler. They've retired now, but when I was at that point of uh, you know needing trees for the layout, I tried to build some myself, and I even bought some kits from Pete and Barb. They didn't work out. They use furnace filter trees, They build them on, and that's what you see kind of over the locomotive here.
Yeah.
But I opted to buy the trees from them. So I owe a huge debt of gratitude to them for the trees. And it was funny when I first ordered trees from them. Pete called me up and said, "Well, tell me about your modeling." And I know you've ordered these kind of short trees, but what are you doing? And so I sent him a picture, and he said, "You need a tree that's like 2 feet tall." Um, and I said, "Okay," and bought one from him. He made it, sent it to me, and it was like, oh, at that point, it's like the whole layout feel changed. And so
Wow.
used a lot of their trees. Eventually, I was taking trees on mountain bike trips we would take just here in the Cascades, and find an unusual tree. I'd send him photos of it. He would make a model of that tree. Um, and those have really helped the layout.
Oh
They,
yeah.
so,
Yeah.
again, stand on shoulders of giants. I have not learned how to do those trees myself. So there's a lot on this layout that I didn't do. Trees is one of them. Um, but
That actually reminds me, I think maybe a lot of us start out when we're young dreaming of building something big and doing it all ourselves. But it seems like almost everybody who's been on the journey for a while eventually learns there's at least one or two things that they should let somebody else do.
that's right.
Right.
And
And
yeah, your checkbook is the best tool in the toolbox
sometimes.
sometimes. and
So
and
I,
go ahead.
I have to say also that I have this I'm building an in-scale module, and it has it's going to have a really nice bridge scene, and I've been trying to figure out what comes first. I'm obviously going to have to operate this module with a piece of plywood going across that river for a while, and I really enjoyed you discussing how you made the new bridge work and sort of operate on it and take the other thing out, because I couldn't figure out exactly what order does that happen, sort of thing. So that was interesting. I'm gonna have to go get that MR article.
Yeah, and it's the way we really build these bridges in the mountains. Is you don't get to change the mountains to fit your
Right.
bridge.
Right.
You've got to do it the other way around.
Yeah.
And so often you are, even though it might be virtual, just on drawings, you've got to set a grade and a horizontal curvature, whether it's straight or not. It's got both horizontal and vertical curves, even if they're zero. But you set all that independent of kind of the bridge. The bridge influences things, but a
Right.
bridge is just incidental to the
Yeah.
transportation system, in this case the track work. So
Yeah.
I as I worked on that trestle, I visited a lot of trestle and looked at them, scratched my head, how did they do this, why did they do that? And that was quite helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's right. And although it's not always intuitive, kind of trying to even if you don't do them in that order, thinking about the fact that the Earth came first and the things we build on top of it, later rather than the other way around, is helpful to get the right look in that scene.
It really is.
Yeah.
Even though in reality that scene is kind of tucked up in a kind of an odd area. It's not a deep canyon that goes way back, but it still works visually, I think.
Yeah.
And
Looked really
I w-
nice.
I will say that probably like many people, I spent hours looking at photos of John Allen's layout,
Mhm.
and thinking that's what I want. But it took me many years to get there.
Now, let's see, the focus stacking thing, that was also interesting. Do you just use a regular, like, 35 millimeter camera for there or something else?
Well, I use a digital camera, so but it
Yeah.
acts like a regular 35 millimeter. uh
Okay.
it's a digital. You can have, I think they do call them SLRs, so they're
Yeah.
like
Right.
single lens
Yeah.
reflex. But the important part, at least the way I know it, and I think this is technology that's changing all the time, but the way I work with it is you must be able to manually control all the elements of the photo. So the f-stop, the exposure setting, the time, and
Okay.
the the focal length. And so many cameras do things automatically. So like
Right.
your iPhone, or if it's an automatic digital camera, you can't do it. If it's a regular, um, 35 millimeter, but not shooting film, but shooting digital, and you can
Yeah.
control it manually, then yes, you can use this focus stacking approach. And Helicon has, for certain cameras, at least last time I checked, they have software that will connect in with certain types of cameras, certain makes, and
Okay. Okay.
take the photos automatically. I'm doing them all manually, so I'm changing the focal length, and I just go through the same steps over and over and over until I get a bunch of digital photos. But I think the software can run the camera to get you the dozen photos, say you want, and
Yeah.
then I take those over to the computer in their software and build a link, or you know
I learned something about that. Although I'd heard about that just watching you, it was useful to see the kind of in progress pictures that showed what each one looked like before you stacked them all together. So I really enjoyed that.
it is striking, and I did not anticipate this until I started using it, is that you can take photos in the ambient light, and they may have only less than an inch that's in focus, and you just keep taking enough of them that you can then stack them all together.
Right.
So this business of trying to get one photo to do it all, or even some people will try to do one or two or three, take a bunch of them and let the program do all the
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's been
Well,
good for me.
well, we're kind of at the top of the hour here. I have to say, I've now seen the first ever photo that I can remember of a layout being held up with climbing gear and carabiners and stuff.
Awesome.
That was pretty cool. That's a neat little vignette of how um, you've put all your hobbies together here. Yeah, that was very, very cool. And then on behalf of the audience, I feel comfortable in saying that we all want you to get busy on the other side of the room and and
Okay.
build that big switching complex that you need over there in Seattle.
Yeah, that's we'll put that on the calendar
Get that on the
somewhere.
list.
Yeah, put it on the list. So,
Lee, thank you so much for joining NMRAx and sharing your beautiful layout with us all tonight.
well, thank you, and thank you for the excellent questions and comments. Like I said, I'm just honored and very pleased to make this presentation to you guys. So,
Well, you made the night really special for me. So thank you very much.
you bet. Take
Good
care.
night.
Good night.